is that we definitely are on the right path. So welcome back. This is just our last mile to really cement and add to what we had already started covering from yesterday. Those of you who have joined us, who are joining with us for the first time, where were you? You've missed out. But nonetheless, I hope that the recap that we are about to do will at least help to bring you up to speed. Our focus is still really around this one critical process of establishing yourself as a social housing institution and getting yourself licensed, or as we call it, accredited as a social housing institution. Khafi is still our lead facilitator. My name is John Mufukeng, and I am with my colleagues here, Mpotziani, and my other colleague from the marketing and communications, Mr. Sikumbuzo Ngwenya. So welcome, Khafi, over to you. Let me try and get this presentation flighted in the meantime.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see you guys are all back for the second day. We are going to be dealing with the more operating side of things today. But to recap on yesterday, we really went through, a definition of what social housing institutions are and ODAs. I do hope that helps you. For those that are wanting to start up and start into social housing, it clarifies for you which route you want to go. Do you want to go the SHI route? Do you want to go the ODA route? That's the first big decision that you make. The second thing we spoke about is the motivation to be an SHI and the type of sort of value system that you ascribe to, which is more altruistic in nature. We then also spoke about establishing your SHI, what type of legal form and what the considerations are, from a taxation point of view, from raising funds point of view, from a cost savings point of view. And then we looked at good governance. So we looked at what are the things you need to have in place to be well governed, the type of skills the board needs to have, the type of policies that you would need in terms of your board charter, your code of conduct, your risk management policy, legal compliance, all those aspects that the board is responsible for in terms of their fiduciary duties and providing strategic direction to the organization. We then briefly touched on financial management and what type of financial management policy you need in place and what are the key aspects of the financial management as it pertains to social housing. Today, we're really going to go in deeply around tenant management or client services management as we know it. And we would then move on to property management and property development. And in between that, we'll do a case study and we will also flight a video. So that's essentially what our program looks like today. But I think enough from me. I'd like to hear from you guys a little bit of a reflection of what stood out for you yesterday and potentially any questions that you slept over last night that you thought, look, it didn't quite make sense to me. Let's talk about it again. Can we have some comments from anyone in the room? Even if it's just a comment or a reflection or a question.
Let me see, just to maybe open the mics. And I see Nkabela, you are first, and then followed by Lisa. Please just unmute yourself and let's hear your question or comment, Nkabela.
Good morning all. Good morning, Tate Mofokeng. Good morning, Khafi. Mine is basically just a question. Firstly, I must say, well, we received quite comprehensive information yesterday, and honestly, I wasn't expecting that. Now, last night I had to look at it, and then what is it that I need to prepare? And the one question I have is with regards to the board, where you stated that there is a requirement for skill as well as qualification. So what I want to, where I need clarity on is, for example, in a case where somebody has been involved in construction for many years, but does not have qualification in construction. Would that type of a person be accepted? Same as the human resource side. You find somebody has done, for example, has done logistics and has worked at various companies with managing subordinates for many years. Will that person be regarded as somebody with the skill in human resource, or the qualification of human resource is the one that would be required? Thank you.
Thanks. That's a good question. With regards to the board, they do look at qualifications and skills. So what I would advise you to do is to find someone that has a built environment qualification to sit with you on the board. So it doesn't matter that you have two skills, one where the skill is, the qualification is there, and the other where the skill is there. So the experience counts. The same goes with HR. You do need the HR qualification from the point of view that it's a highly legislated sphere of the business. And so you would want someone that has a solid legal background or HR background to sit on the board. So there's no reason, again, why the person with the logistics experience can't sit on the board together with someone with HR skills. Remember, in the context of an SHI, none of the directors have any shares. There's no shares. It's a public body. So even if you have 7 board members or 9 board members, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing for a startup for the sole reason that you're bringing more opinions and more people to the table that can assist you to make your decisions in a more meaningful way. So the advice I would give you is, yes, sit on the board together with the other person, but also bring on someone with a qualification in HR and the built environment, because the SHRA will look at qualifications and skills.
Okay, if that adequately deals with that question, let's just maybe then give you, Polisa, a chance to deposit your question or comment. Just unmute yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Mine is just to say thanks for the information. However, I think the information was too much for some of us as we are starting up and everything. So I'm looking forward to hear more. Just that somehow I just needed a clarification in terms of as a startup, since there's OAD and SHI. So I needed to have the difference in terms of starting up, and what is it? What is the difference between those two? And secondly, I just wanted to find out if you have, let's say, you have a space, maybe some government space that it was made to do some RTPs or something. Does SHRA apply on those if you want to apply to utilize that space as well, as long as is recommended by your zone or by your municipality that it can be utilized? So does SHRA intervene in those if you want to apply for that space to use it as well, in terms of but the space is going to be used by government in terms of RTPs as well? So, and secondly, if you have a company like, because I hear yesterday, SHRA was talking about, it seems as if they were promoting something like if your company should be NPC. So if you have a PTY, so how do I go? How do you go along those? Just a recap so that I can just get a clarity on those. Thank you.
Thanks, Khulisa. So this question was really around the difference between an ODA and an SHI. An SHI is a social housing institution that is a non-for-profit company that participates in terms of the Social Housing Act in the delivery and development of and management, of social housing. So it's a not-for-profit company. It is acquiring land, it is developing the land, it owns the land, and it manages the stock, all on a not-for-profit basis. It is entitled to the capital grant of about 65 to 70%, and it then funds the shortfall of the 30 to 35% via debt funding. And in the main, they go to the housing bank, which is the National Housing Finance Corporation. So that is really the funding model and the legal form of an SHI. Then we have an ODA, which is an other delivery agent. It's a profit-making company. And generally, it's a company that is either owning land already and bringing that land into social housing, or it is a developer of land. So it's used to building medium density housing. And then it wants to develop within the sector. And sometimes it's a private property management company that is used to managing stock in the private sector, but wants to now extend its diversified scope to include social housing. So it could be any of those three, or it could be all of those three. What the SHRA would require is that the entity, if it has other businesses in its company already, the SHRA would expect you to set up a special purpose vehicle specifically to house the social housing that they would want to fund, for the sole reason that they've got to protect that asset from the other business if the other business fails. And so that's one requirement. The other big requirement from the funding model point of view is an ODA has got to bring in 20% equity. So the funding model is really, you get the same grant as an SHI, the 65 to 70%, but then the ODA must bring in 20% equity, and then it takes 15% debt. And so the 20% equity is cash equity into the project, and it is based on the total value of the project. So if you're doing 100 units, and the 100 units is going to cost 500,000, then you've got to bring in 50,000 as the equity. So that just gives you a bit of an insight into the way in which an ODA operates. Yeah, that is the difference. I hope that answers that question, but you can come back to me if it doesn't quite, if you have further questions. Your second question was about land that is made available for a broader government housing development. And you said potentially it includes an RDP project. We have seen that, well, firstly, the land has got to be located within a restructuring zone. A restructuring zone is a demarcated area by that wherein which they say in this area we need social housing. So it has a boundary, and that boundary is actually approved by the province and then gazetted by the minister. So social housing can only be developed in those restructuring zones. So if you're thinking about a piece of land, first check to see whether that land is in a restructuring zone. The way in which you can check is to contact the SHRA and give them the earth number, and they will assist you to check whether the land is within a restructuring zone. The other way to check is to contact Mpho, that was in the room from Nashville, and they also have the capability to assist you, provided that you give the earth number to them. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you must be very careful of putting a social housing project next to an RDP project, because people believe what they want to believe, despite the fact that you explain things to them. You would find that they would say, but we are in a 40 square meter house and we have to pay 3,500 rent, but right next door to us is an RDP 40 square meter house, which is free. And then you have a rent boycott that comes, or the risk of a rent boycott. So there's many issues to think about when you're putting a social housing project. If you don't do this, if in a mixed development where there's going to be RDP and FLISP and CRU and all of that, if you don't go in first with social housing and then put the other stuff in, you are going to have problems. So location is of importance, but it's also where you put it and what surrounds the area where you're putting social housing. Because you must remember that RDP is free giveaway, social housing comes with rental. People don't understand it when they're living in a similar type of sized unit, and one has to pay and the other doesn't have to pay. So Lisa, does that answer your help you in any way, or do you have more questions around it?
I think the last one, Khafi, was just on the NPC. I think I heard him asked, how do you make that shift from a PTY to an NPC, if I heard correctly?
Okay. So all you need to do is, if you currently registered as a PTY, you will then make an application to the CIPC. You will fill in that form and you will ask them to convert it to an NPC. But at the same time, when you do that, you also have to change your MOI. Remember, we said that you have to have those 4 clauses in the MOI that talks to social housing, where you don't distribute assets, you don't distribute income, and on winding up, you give the net asset back to the SHRA. So and your main object has got to be the delivery of social housing and the management of the stock over the long term. So if you don't have that 4 clauses in, then your MOI still won't meet the requirements. There is a template that we're going to distribute to you guys in the pack. Use that MOI so that you don't have to go and rethink or redevelop anything. You can just use the template.
Okay, that deals then with...
John, can you tell me what's in the chat? I think we're missing maybe something.
Oh, yeah. But let's take the last hand, Khafi, and then we'll go to
Okay.
the chat line. Ricardo, if you can just unmute yourself. I'm picking up a background noise and I'm going up and down. It's probably Humutso. Let's see if I disable that one. Yeah. So Ricardo, if you can just unmute yourself and ask your question, and then we'll just then, with the 7 minutes left, try and deal with your question and what's on the chat line.
Oh, thank you so much, John. Thank you so much. Khafi, thank you so much once again. Mine is more of a comment and possibly maybe clarity, because I think, Khafi, on the last question, you've touched on what I want to talk about. Just an appreciation of the forum. As much as I'm busy with social housing busy with development and so forth, which is not on the restructuring zone, but the experience, and expertise from this engagement will apply even to other forms of property development. So the appreciation for the border course, I appreciate it. But also, what I wanted to find out, Rafi, as much as other areas are not in restructuring zones, what can SHRA do if there is a demand on that, on those non-restructured zones? What can they do? That's number one. And number two is to touch on what you said earlier, difference between PIPs and social housing and so forth. What can we do as developers to make our, let's call them clients, to understand, these processes and developments? Let me give an example. I have a development in Port Owen in Cape Town, Veldrift. It's a high class development, but also there's a portion of it we call them social housing or RTP housing and so forth. But the resistance towards those within not only social housing people in between or RTPs and so forth, but the resistance within the upper class or the high class developments, to have these kind of developments next to their doors and so forth. What do you do there? Especially if they are privately funded or personally funded and everything else, because you'll find out we can no longer develop, let's say, 500 units of the infant or whatever the case is, without developing maybe 100 units of social housing or even LPP or any other houses and so forth. So what do we do on that? I mean, how can we educate our people saying this is the way forward coming to community development? But over and above it, I appreciate the information which can be used on any other development, and so forth. But also more over and above, but it's an expensive exercise. The emphasis on corporate governance, I really like it, to tell the truth, because it's almost the gatekeeper or the guard on how things should be run and so on. But to get the expertise, and also, let's be honest, corporate governance is relatively new, coming to uptake in South Africa, as much as if people have been doing it informally and everything else. It becomes an expensive exercise to get a person with the required qualifications. We might all have skills on that, but the paper qualifications, it gets expensive to have a board member or director on your platform if you're still starting, So, but over and above, just a comment saying the engagement is fruitful, not only if you're doing social housing, but also if you're doing property development or tenant housing and everything else. But those are the concerns. And what I would like to know, what proactive measures that SHA can do to make sure that when there's a demand, they are proactively not waiting for the municipality. So of course, those take long to saying, we are part of this. I think our last engagement, I mentioned the issue of Paternoster, whereby there won't be any social development accreditation very soon, but the demand for housing projects and everything else, it is there. So it becomes difficult if you don't have a buy-in from SHA, or if you're not on that list of restructuring zones and everything else. Yeah. But over and above it, just appreciation of the course.
Thank you, Ricardo. So a number of issues that you raised. The first one is how to demarcate a restructuring zone where there is perceived demand in that area. You've got to engage the local municipality. The municipality demarcates restructuring zones on the basis of their spatial development framework and their local economic development plans. So where they have corridors of growth, they would inevitably demarcate a restructuring zone in that area. But when you talk about the Western Cape specifically, it would be advisable for you to go and see the province. The guy at the province that is responsible for social housing, his name is Gavin Wiseman. So it's worthwhile having a chat to him and to say, look, what are your plans for expanding restructuring zones in the Western Cape? Is Paternoster or one of the other areas that you have land, is it on your horizon? What does the local spatial development framework look like in that area? I've established demand, and I can share that with you. So it's worthwhile having that engagement both at a local level and at a provincial level. Fortunately, in the Western Cape, things work very well, and so they're very organized, and they will tell you upfront where development is required or not. Obviously, they will focus their attention on the highest economic growth areas. So that's another decision that is made by the province or the municipalities, is they would always prioritize areas of highest economic size and highest economic growth. It goes without saying, because that's where the demand is really centered. So that's the first. There's nothing proactive that you can do. It takes long to demarcate a restructuring zone. Because it goes through those three hurdles. It's got to go to municipal council for approval. That municipal approval then goes to the province. The MEC then signs it off and sends it off to the minister, who gazettes it. What I can say, though, it doesn't take that long anymore. Where it used to take 5 years and longer in the early 2000s, our minister is very on the ball with it. The minute she gets one or gets a few applications, she does the the demarcation. So it is, you know, nowadays you can get it done in 18 months to 24 months. So it's not that long any longer. And I think for you, it's worth pursuing. And I want to link that question of yours to your NIMBY question. So, I mean, we see it often in the Western Cape where the high-end residents say, not in my backyard. You know, you're not doing this there. But again, if you have the support of the PSC and the municipality, they will troubleshoot with you. But also if you have a very good town planner on your team, those town planners know how to deal with public participation and how to unblock the public participation process. And so if you do have that, get a good town plan on board. That's my advice to you. But secondly, also engage, go to the PSC, engage the municipality and the province in that forum. The SHRA is also sitting there, and they can troubleshoot that issue with you. That's my advice on the not in my backyard story, the resistance from the high-end tenants in the area. Then you raise a very valid issue around how do you put this board together? We're asking for these high-level skills. These people, when they come on, they want to be paid, and you don't have money to pay them. And in any case, we're saying the social housing business is a marginal business, so they're not going to earn market-related fees, even once you do have rental revenue coming in. And I want to share, we have Lucky in the room today, and he struggled for a long time to put a board together. And his approach was just, he approached people that he knew, and then he approached people that he didn't know. And, you know, because you've got to try and find people who are interested in the development of this country. We're in a developmental state. And so there's many professionals who are willing to volunteer their time for this type of business. And so how do you find those people? People that want to contribute towards the development of the country, who do not have expectations to earn anything, and that want to make a difference. It's about finding those types of people, and they are out there, and there are many of them. And so it's about what type of strategy you're going to employ to try and find those people. I mean, you can either identify people via the internet and cold call, or you can use your, you know, your network to try and find those people. It's not easy, but it's doable. And most of the SHIs have worked on that basis. The successful SHIs have looked at who, you know, who publishes work, which professors are wanting to do good work. There's many professionals in academia, in business, engineering companies that they're running good businesses. They don't have to look for business from you. They have no expectation to do business with you, but they're willing to contribute towards your development. Try and find those types of people and make it clear upfront that you're not going to earn anything. You're going to sit 4 times a year, possibly for 1 hour, you're going to sit to a meeting, and another hour per meeting, you're going to prepare and read the board packs that come to you so that you can make your contribution. So literally, you are actually giving up about 8 hours of your time in a year. And that's what you're looking for. You're not looking for someone that's going to come and run the business with you or for you. You're bringing in someone that's got real expertise and that will just come and make a valuable contribution when you need to troubleshoot because your delivery is not going, or where you need to get advice because you're having a problem on the management side of things. That's all you're looking for is an advisory board. As long as you have a champion, and Ricardo, probably you will be that champion, the driver of this business. As long as you have that champion that's willing to give their time, the others you really are asking them maximum for 10 hours in the whole year of their time. So, you know, John, it is something that we should also look at from a sector development point of view. We've long said that the SHRA together a panel of retired professionals in the sector or that service the sector that SHIs can draw on for their boards, draw on advisory services and that type of thing. I think it's something we need to, as a sector, think about. But Ricardo, you know, I hope you stay in the sector, and good luck to you to try and find those people. In the Western Cape, it's not going to be a challenge to find. I can tell you that. Go and speak to one or two of the established SHIs. There's Oneven Housing Association. There's Madula Moore Housing Association. Go and speak to those CEOs. Make those contacts, or contact Mpho. She will put you into contact with those guys in the Western Cape. Speak to them, ask them how they did it, how they're doing it, how can they assist you. We're not a sector that are selfish. We're not a sector that doesn't share. We don't have secrets. We're not competing with each other because the demand is so high. And so we share openly. Speak to guys that have done it. You don't have to reinvent any wheel. The not in my backyard story is a bit more complicated. I make it sound easy, but it's not easy, and it is a process, but it's doable. We've done developments in good areas, wealthy areas, and we have, yes, it has taken longer, but we have surpassed those challenges, and it is doable, especially with a good town planner on board. We see now in the Western Cape, there's huge resistance to the piece of land that the city is putting out in Rondebosch East, and the community
Yes.
up in arms about it, but they're not seeing the benefit of what that social housing will do in their area. And so the municipality is going to work through those challenges. They're going to do the public participation process. And I promise you, I think that that project is going to take shape in the next 2 years or so.
So, Rafi, I think we have depleted much and actually eaten into your presentation for this morning. But there was just, I went through the chat line and up and down. There wasn't much coming through except one expression around the jargon and someone just saying they struggled a bit with the jargon that was being used and finding difficulty with expressing themselves. And then Exodus asked a question just around land, and I'll just read it as written. Happy, thanks for the precaution about the land location for social housing project as to avoid rent boycotts and so forth. Sorry. The question will be, does restructuring zoned land from municipality has the land specifically municipality has land specifically for social housing projects, or does it only cater for RDP housing? So I think what Exodus is trying to ask there is whether does municipality release land also for social housing? Is it only for RDP housing program? And that's my essence of what Exodus is asking there.
Yeah, so with regards to the restructuring zone, the municipality identifies an area that needs to be having social housing in it. Within that area, it doesn't necessarily look to see whether there's land available in it. It's up to the SHIs to go and look and find land, but there are instances. So for instance, in the city of Cape Town, and I use them as an example because they probably have the benchmark for doing the work that a municipality should do. So they will demarcate a restructuring zone, not because there's land available in the zone, but it's because there's a need for housing, social housing in that zone. They would then look for municipal-owned land in the zone, and then they select partners. So SHIs that are accredited, that have a bit of a track record, or that is new coming in, will go into their fora, and they will apply to become a partner of the city. In that way, then, the city will allocate them a piece of land at a time, right? And there's many benefits to it. They pay 10% of market value. They get all their town planning and building plan approvals at no cost. They don't pay DC cost. So there's a whole basket of benefits if you're a partner of the city. Now, not all municipalities are that advanced. So what I would do is I would take the restructuring zones. There's a gazette out, and maybe John send out the latest list of restructuring zones if you can get it from Ahmed, and send it out as part of the pack so people can begin to see in my municipality where I would like to develop, here are the restructuring zones and here are the boundaries. So let me look for land within it. If you find municipal land, You will then approach the municipality and say, I found a piece of land, I would like to do social housing on it. How can you release that land for me? You may find it's a municipality that has a social housing policy and has a land release policy, and they will explain to you how it works. Because procurement will always be an open process. It would never be that you approach the municipality and they just allocate the land to you. No, they're not allowed to do that in terms of the Municipal Finance Management Act. But at least you would have identified, you would have made an approach, and you would be, if they say to you, we're going to put it out by tender, look out for the tender, you would then respond in that way. So there's municipal land, then there's state land that you may find in a restructuring zone, much more difficult and much more longer to secure, because you have to go through the Department of Public Works. And we have had challenge. We haven't really had land released by the Department of Public Works as yet. But I mean, we've got to start somewhere, and we've got to look at that as a second option. Then you have your state-owned enterprises land, like you get Transnet land, Prasa land. Prasa has released land in a number of locations around these railway stations in Cape Town to an SHI, who has just completed the Goodwood project. So there's Prasa land. Then there's privately owned land, but the word of caution on privately owned land is that you would have to pay market-related prices, and the social housing financial model doesn't really make provision for market-related prices. But you've got to put the numbers through a quick feasibility to see if it could work. Because I'm not saying that private land doesn't work. It's more difficult to make it work financially. But if the price is right, it could work. And so, yeah, those are the types of things that you need to look at from a land and land packaging point of view. But look at the RZs first. Look for land within the RZ. Look, if you own a piece of land, look to see if it's in an RZ, and then move from that point.
Rafi, in the interest of time, I had said Ricardo would be the last one, but I see there has a new hand that has come up. Tebogo, if it is an urgent matter, maybe just unmute yourself and ask your question or comment, and let's just then go into today's presentation quickly.
Oh, okay, thanks, Dr. Mufokeng. Look, mine is short. I think between the SHI and the ODA, you've always mentioned some shortfall needing to be financed via debt. But you also mentioned that on the ODA side, it comes as a form of an equity. I wanted to understand if you are either working with the owner or you own land or property that you want to develop, does that contribute towards the equity that you, or is it strictly cash?
So the land value can be your equity contribution. What you would have to do is to get a valuation of the land, and depending on that valuation amount, if it does come up to the 20%, then the SHRA will look at that as equity. You can also raise equity via the market and convert part of the equity contribution into a shareholder loan. Financial model allows for that, so the equity partner does get a return on the investment as well. But yes, the land can be used as equity, but you would have to have a market valuation done, and that valuation amount will be used by the SHRA to determine what percentage contribution it is.
All right, I think that then deals with all the questions that were put on the chat and also that came through from participants. Rafi, I have put up the presentation in a presentation mode. Just please confirm if you can see it.
Yes, we can. Can you take us to slide? So this morning, we're going to talk about tenant management or client services management. Remember, yesterday I said to you that is the core of a social housing business, is client services management. It is what sets our social housing management model aside from the private sector, who focuses merely on a lease, doing minimal maintenance, and collecting rent. We collect our rent through client services. We do everything that we do is built on the relationship that we have with our tenants. So we invest a lot of time in 3 aspects of tenancy management. Pre-tenancy, we do, besides our marketing work that we do and receiving applications for units, we also do pre-tenancy training so that people can understand what it's going to be like to live in a medium density type of project. And our pre-screening work that we do is also quite intense. And then from a tenancy management point of view, our main focus is communication, liaison, consultation, participation, rather than taking out a stick when people are non-adhering to a lease. We rather build those relationships and get everyone to buy into a particular value system within the project so that everyone understand that value system and behave in a way that, that espouses that value system. And then post-tenancy, we believe that is extremely important. When the tenant leaves, they must leave happy. They must go and tell 100 other people that I had a good stay here. This is a good place to stay. Because we have found that from a marketing point of view, the best marketing tool in social housing is by word of mouth. And it's free, by the way. As long as you do a good job across these 3 areas, it will always be free. Can we move on, John? So from a pre-tenancy point of view, it's important to research the market. And we spoke about it yesterday. We said in the strategic plan, do a good market survey. Don't do that 300 odd pages that is waffle, that doesn't tell you anything. Be sure you understand the demographics. Be sure you understand the socioeconomic circumstances. See what the rental market is behaving like and what you would have to provide to be discounted to the market. And then make credible projections around what demand is. Because remember, affordability is a big, it prohibits people from entering the social housing market, is that there's such a wide divide between gross income and net income because of so many deductions that people have. And it's their net income that you really have to look from an affordability point of view as to whether they can afford to pay rental. And if you put in someone that can't afford, you're just creating a lifetime problem for yourself because you've put in someone that can't afford to pay rent. They don't pay rent. You chase collecting rental and it costs you a lot of money to chase collecting rental. And then you struggle to do an eviction to get the person out of the unit. So why would you put yourself through such difficulty if you don't do a good job up front? It's important to understand the type of people, and you can be very practical. I take the 5 income groups. I look at the people earning 1,850 to 3.5, and I ask myself, who are they? What type of work do they do? What is the regularity of the income? Because at a very practical level, you'll be able to work out who is the 5% of the people that are going to come in that pays that lowest rent of 600 Rand a month. Where do they work? What do they earn? What type of challenges are you going to have in collecting rental? And then looking at a stepped approach for each income group. The person earning between 15 and 22,000 is someone that's probably in a supervisory role in some government or in a corporate at a bank or so on. So you can then estimate, but that type of person is going to be able to pay 6,000 Rand a month or want to pay 6. They're going to have a more regular, they're going to be a more stable type of tenant, and potentially they're going to have a car. And so there needs to be parking for that percentage of the tenants. So if you go through the 5 segments, you can work out where these people are, where they work, how secure is their employment, and from that point of view, you will be able to work out whether there is real demand for your project that you're planning. And it's also good to know what are the others doing. What is the private sector doing? Are they renting out at 6,000? Are they renting out 85 square meters at 6,000? But we're going to provide a 55 square meter for 6,000. Then you might as well say to yourself, look, the market is going to be diluted. People will go to an 85 square meter unit rather than a 55 square meter unit. You're either going to have a bigger unit or you're going to have a lower rental for your 55 square meters. So do that type of also back of a cigarette box calculation yourself and try and get a sense of the demand. Can we move on, John? We've done all of this. We said, look at the socioeconomic circumstances, look at the rental market and what they're charging, and then make assumptions around demand. Next slide. From a marketing point of view, you know, I managed a social housing institution back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And we spent, way back then, we spent like 35,000 Rand for one advert in the local newspaper. And we got something like 5 people inquired from that advert. And 35,000 in 1999 was a lot of money. It's still a lot of money now. And so we wasted our money. And then we put up a signboard that was like, I think we paid 5,000 Rand for the signage board on the site where the contractor was busy building. And everybody walked past that site because it was on the way to work. And the taxi stopped outside that site. So people saw it. And we had so many inquiries. So use the right type of methodology to advertise your project. Don't spend money on big adverts if that's not the media that the people are going to use. If you want to go and put a stall outside a shopping mall or Checkers or Spa or those types of things, those are probably better solutions than placing big expensive adverts where people, the tenants that would come into your project don't necessarily read the daily newspaper. They don't buy the daily newspaper, that type of thing. So it's important that you use the right marketing channel and that you try and use the cheapest one. I also want to share with you the experience we had where we did a show house. So we got a furniture store and a bedding store to kit out a unit for us. It was a good marketing tool. So we got the contractor to do one block, finished it up front, and we kitted out the one unit and we ran show houses over weekends. It was a good way of marketing, but on the other hand, it also created a problem for us because people saw the unit, everything looked nice, went to the furniture store, made debt for all that furniture, and then couldn't pay the furniture and couldn't pay our rent. So you must also just be careful of the show house scenario. But the objective of marketing is just to have a constant stream of people on your waiting list so that you can have no vacancies at the end of the day. Remember, vacancies equal loss of rent. With a rear rental, you can still try and chase the person to get the money in. But with a vacancy, you're not earning any money in the first place. You just cannot afford vacancy at all. Can we move on? So we spoke about, that is the show house that we had, a little picture of how we kitted the place out in 1999 with all that furniture, and then that ended up having the tenants going to buy all of that. But we found out, I've spoken to leading SHIs in the last 3 months, and they were saying social media is for them the way to go. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. The one SHI said, we only do Gumtree. And so our letting officer comes in the morning, she checks all the Gumtree posts, she downloads it, she makes contact with all of those people, and they go through the application process via this Gumtree thing. There's obviously the show house, there's brochures that you can put out in your offices, there's posters that you can put at the supermarkets, at wherever people go to. You also get free publicity. You know, if the local newspaper hears that you're building a project, they may be interested to run a story about you and your institution and your project. There's also sessions that you can have. We went to big employers, you know, in East London. We have one big employer, which is automotive industry, Mercedes-Benz. So we went to make presentations there to their staff, which they allowed us to do. But at the end of the day, we found that the South was the most effective, especially for turnover of units. People that moved out, we paid a lot of attention to them moving out, doing an exit interview, having them leave in a very happy way from our units. And they would be the ones that would say, go there, the rentals are cheap, the services are good, they treat people well, and those types of things. Can we move on, John? So we've done the marketing. We are now receiving applications. This application process is also an important process because the supporting documents that we need to enable us to screen those applications are important. And we screen for two things. One, whether you qualify for the social housing program. You know, if you have owned property before, or if you currently own property, you will not be eligible. If you're not a South African citizen, you're not eligible. You've got to be over the age of 18 years old. Those types of things we screen for. The second thing we screen for is affordability. And guys, we don't only look at a payslip, because anybody can manufacture a payslip. You can even have a payslip with a phone number, and you phone that person and the person says, yes, Khafi's employed there. But when you go and look, the person that you phoned is actually not a company. It's just a friend answering a phone, right? So we look at much more than the payslip. We do a credit check. We look at the bank statement. The bank statement for me is probably the most powerful tool of doing an affordability check, because it will tell you how that person spends its money when the money comes in. So the salary comes in on the 1st of the month, and then you look from the 1st to the 7th, what is the behavior? Do they go to the ATM and draw out all the money and then all the stop orders are unpaid? After that, that tells you something about that person. That's not a tenant you would want, right? They don't behave in a way that services their debt well. The same with the credit check. It tells you whether they own property. It tells you whether they have directorship in other companies and are earning more money than what they pay. Slip is telling you. There's a number of things. So you need to do a combination of all these checks to be able to ensure that you put the right tenant in. Because the last thing you also want to do is to put someone in that can't afford, that you're placing that, you're not doing a service to that person. You're actually doing a disservice to that person. And you're also creating a long-term problem for yourself, because you're going to struggle to collect rent. And at some stage, you're going to move to eviction. Move on, John. Thanks. So we've spoken about affordability check. We've spoken about eligibility for the social housing program. And remember, the gross income and the net income is two important things to look at. So it's also good to do a personal budget with the person, because even on their net income, you would find that they still have other commitments like school fees and taxi fares and food that they need to buy before they can actually also pay their rent. So it's important to do the pre-screening on the payslip, the bank statement, the credit check. But a second layer of screening has got to say, so what is your net income and what expenses do you have? And what would then your net income be? It's got to be a positive amount after the rent is paid. Can we move on, John? Then we do pre-tenancy training. So we don't assume that the tenant coming in or the person interested in renting a unit understands the social housing program, understands how to behave in a medium density environment, understands what their responsibilities are in terms of being a lessee, and what the expectation can be in terms of what the SHI or the ODA is offering them as services. So we do this training upfront. It can take many, we do it in many ways. I am OCD about it, the way I do it. We run a training course. We bring in 20 people after work, say at 5:30 at night, and we give them a light supper, and we then take them through these 5 modules. So we explain what the social housing program is about. We then, and it's very interactive in nature. So it's really not like what we're doing now, which is more classroom style stuff. It's much more interactive, where those sitting in the room are participating in the conversation. We then talk about financial rights and responsibilities. So when is rental due? How much is the rental? When will rental increases? What happens if you don't pay rent? Right up to the eviction stage, we cover those. And we role play those so that tenants can begin to understand what those responsibilities are. We then, but we also focus on the responsibilities of the SHI, because we have many SHIs that have a rent boycott, and they just blame the tenants being the bad guys. They don't pay, but they are the ones that can't send out a bill on time. They are the ones that cannot send a bill out that's correct, that is correctly reflected. They can't account for the rent deposit that they've collected. Do you think tenants are going to pay you rent if you can't send them a bill on time, if the bill isn't right, if you can't account for the money they've paid you? No, they're not going to trust you. So it's a two-way street, guys. We as SHIs always put ourselves in the right, and we always put the tenants in the wrong. But it's not always the case. The third thing we talk about is social rights and responsibilities. So how do you behave on site? What constitutes noise, nuisance? We discuss those types of things. What type of behavior do we want to see on site? The fourth element, we talk about maintenance rights and responsibilities, and we then clarify the fact that, in essence, the SHI is responsible for the outside of the building, and you are responsible for not wear and tear, but breakage. So if you break something inside the unit, you fix it. You know, we are responsible inside of the unit for wear and tear. So we cover that, and then we talk about landlord and tenant relationship management. So how do we talk to each other? We're going to do newsletters. We're going to do house visits. You can come to the office. This is how complaints are dealt with. We discuss that whole client services aspect. And then lastly, we talk about tenant participation and development. And we already introduced them to say we are going to be running these programs. We have program for the youth. We have sports programs. These are the types of community development programs we run. This is the person you would talk to if you're interested in any of these. And so this is how you can join, and this is how you can participate. So we cover that in a pre-tenancy program. So some SHIs, because you don't always have 20 units that you're letting out in a particular month, they may do it in a slightly different way. But the last thing we want to do is to let this take place of you reading something to a tenant. It's like some people say we do pre-tenancy training, and we read all the clauses of the lease agreement to that tenant. Guys, that is ineffective. It doesn't work. And the way in which we do this, when we role play, so for instance, we don't tell the tenant, these people in the room, what constitutes noise. We ask them what constitutes noise. They will then say to you, loud music after 12 o'clock at night is not acceptable. So they begin to self-regulate and say, but it's not acceptable for a party to carry on till 4 o'clock in the morning. It's not acceptable for you to run a business from your unit when it's a residential unit. It's not acceptable to put 10 people into a unit when it's a one-bedroom meant for 3 people. So if you ask them those questions, they will answer those questions. And so when you do have problems going forward, when they're in your unit, you can say, but remember we had this training. We remember you are the one that said parties after 12 is not acceptable. So this is the method that you use, and the way in which you do it, and the type of conversations you're having is important because it helps you manage the stock after these people become tenants. Can we move on, John? So from a selection point of view, you must be clear, your policy, your tenant management policy that we're talking about. It must be clear about, you go onto a waiting list, who gets an offer of a unit first? Is it on a first come, first service? Is it on a point scoring basis? Be clear about how you're going to allocate a unit, because the last thing you want to have is 5 people are eligible for the next unit that comes up, and you're gonna pick it out of a box, and then you're gonna have 4 other people that are gonna complain, and you're not gonna be able to justify why you gave that one person the unit. Please have it, for me, it's a first come, first service basis. The person that applied first should get the unit. And if there is 5 people that applied on the same day, then you need to introduce a second layer of a point scoring system. So which family will fit into this unit most from an income point of view, from a household size point of view, and you select the person closest to, with the highest points to go into the unit. So you've got to think about this thing up front. And consistency is everything. You can't say to a tenant today, you allowed pets, and tomorrow you, in fact, you'd say to the tenants, the house rule says there's no pets. And then for a fact in one unit, these people are harboring a cat, and tenants start to complain. They're going to hold that against you because you know that there's a cat in the unit, you did nothing about it. Please, guys, consistency is everything. it can lead to a rent boycott if you're inconsistent in the way in which you deal with issues that arise. From an allocation point of view, they must have been screened, they must have passed the affordability check, the subsidy criteria check, they must have been trained, all their documentation must be in place, and you then can give the information on what is the rent deposit, what is the first rental amount, what is the date that you can come and sign your lease. The allocation and selection process are not processes that you should skip straight from pre-tenancy training and go to signing a lease. There's a whole number of things that you need to do in between leasing and pre-tenancy training. Can you move on, John? From a letting point of view, there's a whole lot of things that need to happen. They need to sign the lease agreement. If you don't have prepaid water and electricity, they must go and connect the municipal services. If it's not directly with the municipality and you're holding a bulk meter within your SHI, there is still some connection that they have to do with you. They must pay their first month's rental and pay their rent deposit. Once that is done, then they're actually ready to sign the lease agreement. And once they've signed the lease agreement and you have the date for them to move in, again, it's just good practice to take them around the site, say, this is where you're doing your washing, this is where you put your black bags for refuse removal, this is the day removal will happen, this is where the kids can play, this is where you park your car, this is how the security works on site, there's a biometric, whatever the case may be. Going then into the unit doing the pre-inspection. Remember, it's a legal requirement that the pre-inspection form is attached to your lease agreement. And so that pre-inspection form becomes your post-inspection form when the tenant moves out. So when they came in, the walls were white. They decided to paint it purple. When they move out, they must be clear that those walls must be brought back to white because that is the state in which they got the unit. And then obviously you give them the keys and you then, if there's anything that you find on the pre-inspection form that you need to address from a maintenance point of view, you will already tell them on that day, my maintenance guy is either with you, doing the pre-inspection with you, and they will come back tomorrow within 3 days to fix up, but you put in already a process in place to fix up whatever needs to be fixed up if it's your responsibility. So that is how moving in. So that ends your pre-tenancy work that you need to do. Can we move on? From a letting point of view, have various modes of communication. You know, it isn't a one-size-fits-all. We did a newsletter, but we only did the newsletter every 6 months. And so in the newsletter, let it not be a complaints thing that you're only moaning about people not paying. You're only moaning about people not dealing with their rubbish or with the children in a good way. When they come from school, they're a nuisance, they're writing on the walls. Let it be a two-way communication thing. Let it be also highlighting the good things that are happening on site, you know. And what we did is we split the newsletter in half. Half of the messages were from ourselves as the SHI. The other half, we did interviews with tenants or the community development tenants that were involved in community development programs. They would write up articles. So there would be tenants talking to themselves and talking to us, and us talking to tenants in the newsletter. So it was really a good mix. And we also had a back page with puzzles and things for adults and kids to, to do with. We had competitions running and our community development programs with. So you can use that. We have an SHI that has a dedicated TV channel for kids who do their homework or that get homework classes or maths lessons online. We haven't seen many of the SHIs going to that length, but I want to show you best practice that these things can be done at very little cost. You can have circular letters, you can have meetings with tenants. The house visits are an absolute. For me, we did that quarterly. We visited a house every quarter, and the tenant liaison officer would sit, have a cup of tea with the tenant, discuss the tenant, they're having a baby, or they're going to be facing a job loss, or just anything. And what we would do is we would take our maintenance officer with us on these house visits. They would have a quick look over at the bathrooms and the kitchen and just to see that the tenant is in the state of repair. Those house visits are early warning signs that will tell you, look, they're going to face strife because they're facing retrenchment or whatever the case may be. Proactively, you can begin with problems that come out of these house visits. There's also the one-on-one. Some people just like to come into the office. They love coming to the client services office and just having a chat with the staff. Entertain that. Then there's focus groups. There's people that organize themselves around specific areas. We have many families who are having their parents, old age parents living with them. Those people are unoccupied. The old ladies love to do gardening, or they like to have a knitting group or sewing group or so on. Those focus groups are active, and they also keep the community going and keep the community alive. And obviously your community development program should be informed by the needs of the tenants. So this is a very important, it's relationship building, it's two-way communication. It's not that the tenant doesn't know how to talk to you, you don't know how to talk to the tenant, and you don't actually talk to each other. There's no relationship. And so when things go south and things are not working out, you don't know where to start. You are close to the tenants. Can we move on? So from a complaints management point of view, please guys, your policy must have a system in place. How to register a complaint, where to register a complaint, who's going to assess the complaint, what action is going to be taken, how are you going to bring business improvements on the outcome of common complaints. And here we're not talking about maintenance complaints, guys. We're talking about social complaints, anti-behavioral complaints. They're much more difficult to deal with. And you can also see from your maintenance records whether there's abuse happening in a unit. So if you have broken windows and broken doors or broken equipment in your unit on a Monday morning, you better know that there's a social problem in that unit. It's not a maintenance problem. So you must have that type of intelligence to decipher where there are antisocial or behavioral problems, and you must be able to have links to CBOs and NGOs that deal with those types of things, that can come in and provide some support or guidance. And ultimately, continuous antisocial behavior must lead to eviction. It can't be tolerated by you as a social housing institution, because you're just going to have anarchy on site. It will be a free-for-all, and you'll have no control of what is going on. Can we move on, please, John? From a dispute resolution mechanism, you've got to have a policy in place. It's got to be fair, it's got to be open, and you have to have the structures in place to be able to go through. Either you negotiate internally, you mediate internally, but when it comes to conciliation and arbitration, you've got to then bring in external experts that can be independent of you as the SHI, to be able to get to some type of a agreement or consensus. And then obviously in the worst case scenario, it's litigation, right? And litigation can happen in two ways. A tenant can go to the tribunal, or they can seek relief from the local courts. And so have a system in place, because these things do happen. It's either the tenant is having a dispute with you as the SHI, so you must have layers within your organization that can deal with these disputes. And then you must have an external independent person that can mediate if it's to do with your board or your CEO there's a complaint with. Then obviously there's no one inside the organization that can deal with it. And then obviously if it gets to the point where tenants are having disputes amongst each other, again, you'll do the initial stages, but if it can't be resolved and it turns into a large-scale conflict, better bring in experienced people to deal with it. Can we move on? The next big thing in your policy is really to talk about community development. And it's a very, even I struggled in the beginning to understand what is it and what is its benefits. So if I can explain it very simply, it's about tenants becoming active citizens and taking responsibility for the environment that they live in. And in doing so, then they become, right? So examples that I can use is, for instance, there's potholes outside the front gate. The street lights are not on at night. It's dark, so crime is happening outside of the project. If tenants got together and participated in the local community development, community policing forum, they would be able to deal with the crime aspect. But also if they organize themselves and walk and go down to the municipality and say, look, we're demanding that you fix up the potholes, that the street lights work at night. You know, so they take care of their urban management responsibilities, and they don't just sit back and wait for you as the SHI to do everything for them, but they rather become active in their environment. That is what community development is about. Tenant empowerment, again, is more about a tenant came in as a domestic worker earning 1850 per month, and 3 years down the line, because you've been running some education, ABET training as part of your community development program, this domestic worker went through that program and was able to secure a clerical or administrative type of job. That is what tenant empowerment is about. It's also about people that, you know, we always say that people that don't pay their rent are just, they're bad. They don't want to pay. But we don't understand what is the reasons why they don't pay. Some people just don't know how to budget. They will spend their money on airtime and data and DSTV. And once they've done that, now they scratch their heads. Where am I going to get the rent money? Where am I going to buy food for the month? They just don't know how to budget. Or they are juggling so much expenses that they don't know what to prioritize first. And a simple budgeting course can assist those people. Bringing in debt, what do you call those, debt counseling people, can help people to resolve how to prioritize settling debt. It's those types of interventions that can also empower tenants. So tenant empowerment is really trying to get a healthier tenant, trying to get you know, a person that's more economic, that improves the economic situation, that improves their social situation, and those types of things. So there's also a difference between tenant empowerment and community development. Sometimes we put it together and we see it as one. It's not one. And the programs centered around these two things are quite different in nature, and they have different outcomes. But all of it, I must say, is like the heartbeat of social housing. It is what we live and die by as a social housing institution, and we know what benefits it brings to the tenants and the tenant community, and ultimately to ourselves as the SHI. We collect our rentals better, we have better behavior on site, we have tenants who are now improving their lives, their life circumstances, and all of those good things happen. And those are the things, guys, that is the center of who we are as social housing institutions. This is what we do. We don't just build a house, put someone in and leave that person to struggle on their own. We actually become involved. We aren't the drivers, but we're the supporters and the facilitators of this. I also want to end off community development on using an example. You know, these poverty alleviation programs and these community development programs. So I want to use the soup kitchen as an example. If our community development officer says, I'm going to go to the spa and go and ask for donations for soup mix and ingredients to make soup. I'm going to go back to the office. I'm going to cook the soup. I'm going to put out a table outside the project, and I'm going to serve the soup. That is not community development, guys. That is poverty alleviation. You are creating expectation from people to come and collect soup from you, to stand in a queue and collect soup. Community development is a different approach. Using the soup kitchen as an example again, you would get the tenants to organize themselves to go and look for donations. They would make the soup. They would serve the soup to those people that can't afford, that need food. In that way, you're teaching them how to, you're teaching the tenants how to cook. They can become chefs, and you're teaching them how to organize and serve, right? They could become waiters or something in a restaurant. So can you see how empowering that is? I mean, some of them could go into a fundraising a career. Some could go into a cooking career in a restaurant. Others could become servers in Pick and Pay or wherever they could. And that is tenant empowerment. And so it's also important for you to understand that you don't drive community development and tenant empowerment programs. The tenants have to drive it. You must just be that one that organizes them to see that they need this program and this is how they can do it. You support them, you give them the tools to do that. But it's not your program, you do not own it. It's something that you are supporting. Can we move on, John? Can we move on? I've spoken to all of these. Move on. I also just want to, maybe what I didn't cover is you may be thinking to yourself, so where do we get the money to do this? I said earlier that the rentals are constrained. And so where does the money come for it? There's smart ways of organizing this. I mean, again, in the early 2000s, I ran very sophisticated community development programs, or I supported it as an SHI. We looked at our service providers first, our banker, our maintenance, our gardening service, all of those, and we looked to them for sponsorship to adopt certain programs. So the gardening company, they ran our gardening and our what do you call this thing, waste recycling program. We had around our site, we had McDonald's, we had KFC, we had a whole lot of those types of companies that gave us juices and chips and sweets for the kids. If we had school holiday programs, we had schools, we had two, not private schools, but Model C schools centered around our project. We used those teachers to come and do our homework classes. They volunteered 1 hour a day on a Thursday and a Tuesday. We had sports clubs close by who then sponsored the setting up of a soccer team and running a soccer tournament in our playground, a few times a year. So there's ways and means of getting sponsorship in. There's a lot of social responsibility programs that you can tap into. And you can look first at the people that are providing services to you. They are quite happy to sponsor your programs because they're already doing work with you as an SHI. If you want to get very sophisticated, you can even go to the extent where, if you look at Madula Moore, they were set up in partnership with a church called Mes Aksi. And Mes Aksi runs their social development or their community development programs. But they raise funding through the Department of Social Development. So that is a much more sophisticated method. You have the JHC that has also got a separate entity called Makolong Amakaya, I think it is. But they were capitalized by some international donor funder. But what they did is they didn't spend that money, they invested the money, and they used the interest of that investment to fund their community development programs. But they're so advanced, they have a relationship with one of these big soccer teams in the UK, like Arsenal or Manchester United, one of those big ones. And those guys come down once a year and, they run soccer academies and have competitions and so on. With Madula Moore, they also have a relationship with the Dutch national soccer team who comes down once a year. And in Heilbrouw, they run some type of a tournament and so on. So you can get as fancy as you can, and it's just by organizing. It's not costing a cent. It's by using your networks and your to sell your story and to bring opportunities to the tenants. We in East London, we named our street names after 4 famous musicians, and we brought the musicians down to our project. And one of the musicians then offered a music scholarship to some of our students who then went on to apply their trade professionally in the music field. So guys, you don't have to think small. You can think big, and you can think smart of organizing these types of things in a way that is really not going to cost you. It's just going to cost you sweat equity. Can we move on? I think I must move off this one. It's my area of passion as well. I spend too much time on it. The one thing that you need to do is also tenant satisfaction surveys. So it's important that you understand what is the tenant feeling about you as an institution, about the product that you're offering, about the services that you're offering, and just what they think about their neighborhood in general. Because remember, the neighborhood, gosh, it's our dirt truck. If the neighborhood is not good, no one is going to want to come and rent a unit from you. So it's in your interest to also see that things work outside the project, that there isn't crime and grime outside the project, because then no one's going to want to come in your project in the first place. It's not going to be perceived to be safe or anything. So, and this doesn't have to be a very long questionnaire that you administer, and you don't have to do 100% audit. You can do like a 33 and a third percent survey once a year, and you can get a good sense before you do your strategic planning or your business planning. You use the results of that survey to tell you, well, tenants are not happy with maintenance. We're taking too long. We're not getting it right the first time round. Tenants are not happy with our rental accounts. We have too many mistakes on the rental accounts. That survey will tell you those types of things, and you can then act to improve on those services. Now, the way in which I organized it, there's university students. There's generally a local university close to where your project is or in the surrounds. There's students that must do experiential training, especially in the socio-economic research unit. You get postgraduate students. They're very happy to come in and you pay them a little amount to come and do a survey. So they used to do parking surveys for me, just to see what the parking usage was, because we had too many parking bays and too little cars. So we could have rather built more units. So we did a survey over a 3 to 4 year period every year. Took the how many cars were there at 8 in the morning, midday, and at night after 6 when people come from work, and then worked out what the maximum usage was, and then lobbied the municipality to reduce our parking requirements, and we converted some of those to play areas because we didn't have enough play areas. So it's that type of way in which you can do these surveys that are independent, that is not going to cost you an arm and a leg, but that is going to give you valuable information. The SHRA also does one every 3 years. They come around to your project. It's not necessarily 3 years on the dot. Sometimes it's 5 years later, and they do a bigger survey, right? They do a more comprehensive survey, and they do share those results with you. But I think you should take the responsibility of doing one every 18 months to 2 years. And it's a very light, small questionnaire. Get some university students or volunteers to come and do it for you. Pay them a small fee, and then use those results to inform business improvement. Can we move on, John? Then it's about exit. Remember, we said that by word of mouth is your best marketing tool. And so you must ensure that tenants leave in a good way. And so the first thing we're saying is a tenant would give notice, and then you don't even bother to respond. You just take it, I've received a notice, they're moving out, and you go and say to them, we're going to do a maintenance inspection, and you must bring the keys in at 10 o'clock on the 30th of September. Nothing in between. A good practice would be you receive the notice on the 1st of the month. On the 2nd or 3rd, right back and you say to them, thank you, we've received your notice, we've registered it. This is what is going to happen. We're going to come in on this day to do a maintenance inspection. What's going to be your responsibility? We expect you to complete it by this date. We will come and then inspect to see that you've done it in a good way. If you want us to do the maintenance for you, we can come in, we'll give you a quote. You'll have to settle it before you move out. We then would also talk to them about the exit interview, make an appointment, do the exit interview, give feedback on the exit interview, explain to them what would happen with the rent the last month's rent and the rent deposit. You know, this is a highly legislated procedure. And so you've got to pay the rent deposit within 7 to 14 days if there's no maintenance dispute. If there's a maintenance dispute, within 21 days. You have to make arrangements that you will be there at 10 o'clock on the 30th to take the keys over and make sure that you then give them an update on the deposit refund that is going to happen after they move out. So on tenant exit, that is important. John, I think and then the way in which, and we did go through an organogram earlier, but you should have a client services manager. You should have a community development officer that is someone with a social work degree that runs all those community development tenant empowerment programs. You should have letting officers that will deal with the letting process. But because letting is also not a constant or consistent requirement, once you've let your new project and your turnover is low, there's very little work for the letting officer. So they generally also fill the role of a tenant liaison officer. That tenant liaison officer is sort of your good cop. It's the person that does the newsletter, the person that communicates, works with the community development officer on consultation, participation, liaison, and all of those good things. And it's your credit controller in your finance department that is the bad cop that sends a SMS every day to say rent is due, and so on and so on. So this really ends your tenant management policy that the SHRA is requiring from you as part of the accreditation application. It's a big one, and be clear about it. The next policy that is required is an property management policy. It's the 6th KPA of the accreditation process. The first thing required from the property management policy is that you must have a system to meet the property management KPIs and thresholds. Now, those KPIs and thresholds are very clear. From a rent point of view, is what is your average rental? It can't be more than the SHRA benchmark. What is your average rent collection rate? What is your average bad debt rate? What does your debtors look like? 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. Those are the rent indicators that you should be looking at. From a maintenance indicator point of view, how much are you spending on maintenance? What types of maintenance? What is your turnover time? Are you getting it right the first time? Or are you going back to fix up bad workmanship all the time? Those are the types of maintenance indicators. From a facilities management point of view, what does your security reports tell you on a daily basis? What incidents are prevalent? Is it crime? What is it? You know, what is the state of cleanliness and the state of repair of the washing lines, the refuse areas, the playgrounds, the outside drains, the outside lights that service the buildings. All of those things are your thresholds around facilities management. From a vacancy point of view, it's just two indicators. One, what is your vacancy rate, and what is your loss of rental in rands? Those are the two indicators for vacancies. And then from a utilities point of view, just to say that utilities are paid up, or there's arrears of so much percent for utilities, particularly not for the rent component, but the utilities component. So your policy needs to talk to this property management performance arrangements. Can we move on, John? From a rental management point of view, there's a few aspects, policy and procedures that you need in place. The first is the deposit. How much deposit do you need? Now, that question will really be answered by the time it will take for you to get an eviction. But you will never, from the income groups that we're catering for, you will never, if it's going to take you on average 3 to 6 months to get an eviction, and you're going to ask for a 6 months rent deposit, it's just not going to work. It's not affordable. No one will be able to come up with your deposit. So you're never going to mitigate that risk completely. But you have to look at what is that risk and what does it amount to. Then you've got to decide, so from an affordability point of view, what can my target market afford? Is it 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months rental as a deposit? Now, the average that we have is 1 month, because that is what tenants can afford. Because remember, they've also got to pay their first month's rental. So it's almost as if they're paying a double rental when they come in. There are SHIs that allow you to save your deposit. So from the date that you apply to the date that you're going to get the unit, you can save with them. And the interest that you earn on that savings is actually accrued to yourself, like it does in the case of a deposit that they're holding. And so it's less cumbersome for the tenant when they are allocated a unit to come up with 2 months rental. They will just have to be coming up with a 1 month's rental. It's important that you say when it is due. It is actually due at least a day before they sign the lease agreement. It's no use signing a lease agreement if the deposit is not paid and the first month's rent is not paid, because then you sign a lease, you give them an expectation, they don't come up with the rent, and you actually don't have a tenant. You end up having a vacant unit because you now have been working with one tenant, and at the end of the day, you find out you don't have that tenant because they can't come up with a deposit, and your unit stays empty for another month because you're going to the next person on the waiting list. So there's also legislative requirements on the deposit. It's got to be held in a separate interest-bearing account. Interest has got to accrue to the tenant and not to yourself. You've got to run a separate accounting system for that. And it is payable to the tenant within 7 to 21 days, depending on whether you have a dispute on your rent account or a maintenance dispute. Can we move on, John? The next thing is how to set rentals. So we have two common ways in which we set rentals. It could be on a cost per square meter basis, which is probably the best route to go. You pay for what you're getting. And it's easy to distinguish this. You can say to tenant A, you in a 40 square meters, your rent is 5,000. You are in a 30 square meters, your rent is 2,000. So it's easy to justify, and tenants understand it better, and it's the least risky option for you. What it does mean, though, is that you have to have a mix of at least 6 unit typologies in when you develop your project, so that you can cater for the 5 income groups with different unit typologies or different unit sizes. And the 6th one is really for your deep down market, because what the SHRA says is, we're giving you a big grant of 428,000. We do not expect you to give the smallest unit to the lowest income. You know, it doesn't mean that the smallest, the cheapest rental, that family that goes into that unit is the smallest household. So they want a level of cross subsidization. The second thing is an income-based rental. So you'll have your project, and you will determine a rental for each unit, and you would then put people of a certain income into each unit. So it will be an income-based rental. That one is a little bit more cumbersome. It has a bit more administrative requirements, and it is less easy to sustain over the long term. So if you have 2 people in a 2-bedroom unit, one is paying 5,000, the other paying 4,000, because their incomes vary, and they chat to each other and they say, but we got exactly the same. Don't underestimate the intelligence of tenants. They take out a tape measure. They measure the wall-to-wall square meterage, and they will tell you that I'm 40 square meters, my neighbor's 40 square meters, and we're both paying different rentals. They don't understand the cross-subsidization model. So in income-based rental, there's some SHIs that really say it works well for them and they manage it well. But there are others, we've had rent boycotts on income-based rentals where all the units are the same size. People are paying between 600 and 6,000 for the exact same unit. They get talking to each other. They don't like it. They don't want to cross subsidize. And then they have a rent boycott. So you've got to consider carefully your capacity and your capability when deciding on setting your rentals. From a rent increase point of view, be clear in your lease agreement. What is it going to increase by? It's going to increase by the rate of inflation +1, or the rate of inflation, or 10%. Remember, the SHRA also regulates the rentals. You can't just put it up as you please. You have to justify on an annual basis why you're increasing the rental by a certain percentage. You have to show that your expenses have increased by that. You also have to be clear about the frequency. Generally, leases increases do not happen more than once a year. It is better to look at your annual financial year, because then you're doing a recurring journal Administratively, it's less work. You just change everything once a year and you run a recurring journal for the rest of the year. If it's on the anniversary of a lease agreement, it means you will have rental increases every month of the year. Administratively, it's a nightmare, guys. So I think it's better to use your financial year end. The notice of rent increase is an extremely important part of tenant management. Tenants don't like rent increases, even though the lease agreement is said, and you said in pre-tenancy training it's going to increase by the rate of inflation once a year on this month of the year. They still try to resist it. So it's important that your tenant management process has a whole communication. You don't only send out the notice. We advocate for you sending out the notice 2 months before it happens. And in that first month of the 2 months, your tenant liaison officers are on site talking to people about preparing for that increase. Because remember, they've got to top up their rent deposit. They've got to increase their debit order. That they pay their rental monthly with, and all of those things must happen within that last month when the rent increases. So that communication aspect of it is good, and education around it. So explaining to them that the rent is not increased because we're going to increase our salaries as staff, but it's going to pay higher rates, higher gardening cost, higher maintenance costs, because everything has gone up. And so also to have early warning signals to see if there's going to be resistance. If tenants are going to organize themselves up into groups, you must be able to communicate and liaise with those groups to try and break down that resistance that's going to happen. Can we move on, John? From a billing point of view, we spoke at length about send it out at least 5 days before month end. Make sure that your rent account is correct. Rather send out a statement than an account, because the statement will give an opening balance. It will raise the rent for the month. It will show the payment they made the previous month, and they will then also on the side of the statement will show, yeah, is your rent deposit. We do have it. It's shown on the statement, so they can see everything that they've paid on their statement in one go. That is just a better way of dealing with it. Then from a collection point of view, guys, please do not take cash. Cash is just a problem. You open yourself up to people coming to steal. You have to go walk to the bank with the money and go bank the money. You have higher levels of staff, misusing the system for their own benefit, and that type of criminality that happens. The most important payment methods that we do have is a preferred debit order, where the SHI pays the bank to get the money from the person's bank account when the salary comes in. And so that has been the most successful payment method that we've had. People have this easy pay where you can do your shopping, you can pay at Pick n Pay or Checkers or whatever. It's convenient. You have SHIs with the Yoko machines or those other credit card machines at the site office. You have a number of payment methods that suit the various tenants, and also remember, public servants get paid on the 15th of the month, so you rather have your rental coming in on that date in advance than to wait till the end of the month when there's no money left in the account. So you've also got to look, you get in your lower income groups, those people are not necessarily formally employed. They taxi drivers who get weekly pay. Rather have a weekly payment system with them, so that at the end of the month, the month's rental is paid. And those types of things. Your age analysis, guys, you have to look at every day. Né? I'm going to play you a video now where you're going to see what the top SHIs are saying about how they collect rental. So your age analysis and your REA reports, someone is sitting with that every day. Your credit controllers are busy, and they're even engaging your tenant liaison officers and your community development officers to go and work with tenants who are struggling to pay. Can we move on? Let's see if this is, yeah. So we've spoken about credit control that is going to happen on a daily basis. You don't stop rent collection at any time. It's not a pressure point the first of the month and the end of the month. It's an everyday thing. Can you move on, John? Remember, you also, when you outsource the eviction process to an attorney, guys, don't outsource it and you don't understand what it entails. And the attorney gives you a story every day, right? And that story is about we can't get to a summons because the court, or we can't get to a default judgment. Understand what the steps are that they are going to take. We're going to go into a comfort break right now, Pumzile, and we're also going to then play the video immediately when we come back. I just want to finish rent management. I think we're on the last slide. So your first responsibility is to make sure there's a rent account. On the 3rd or the 7th of the month, you want to send out a letter of demand. People may come and make arrangements. Do not make arrangements with tenants that are impossible for them to meet. If they say, I'm going to pay 1.5 months rental over the next 3 months, and that's how I'm going to get up to date, it ain't going to happen, guys. Where they're going to get that extra half a month when their salary is the same amount? Then the legal process starts with a summons, which must be obtained from the courts. Then default judgment application goes in. At the same time, when you do default judgment, you must also apply for an emolument and attachment order, which is your garnish order, and then you go for the eviction. Once the eviction is granted, you have to engage the sheriff's office to get the eviction executed. And if the person hasn't taken out the furniture on that eviction, you will have furniture that has to be stored with the sheriff, and them to do an auction and sell off that furniture to defray the rental. So better understand all of this, so that, and you can also internalize much of this process. You don't have to go there's a misunderstanding where we think that we have to go to a lawyer for the entire process. You can internalize much of this process, and just the court sitting processes, you need a lawyer to represent you. So it's better that you understand this, because you could outsource this to a lawyer, and the lawyer could take you around the block for 18 months and not give you get in a cent and send you a bill every month. So it costs you more for the lawyer than what it's going to cost you to actually collect the rent. Johnny, is this the last slide on the rental management? Yes. So, John, I'm suggesting we take a break until 11 o'clock. And then, Paul, can I ask you to play the Rainier video when we get back at 11 o'clock?
Okay, Khafino, that's fine. And then I also picked up that on the video, I'm not sure if it's the one that you have. The one that I have is that one that starts with a cut, shot, get ready, 1, 2, 3. Is it fine?
No, wait, let me rather, well, I'll try and play it from my side then.
Okay, okay. No,
Perhaps I
that's
must
fine.
test it now with you and Paul while everyone goes to lunch.
Yes, yeah, no, we can do that. We can do that. John will just need to give me the sharing right.
I have given you the sharing rights, Paul. Maybe
Let me
let's do
see.
the testing. But just back to you, Hafi.
Yeah,
The
give it to
comfort
me, John.
break, the comfort break that you are giving us, it's for what? Because I see it's 10 to 11. So should we maybe do 10 minutes and come back at 11?
Can we do 11:05? I think that it
5 past.
will be
Okay.
fair, because we had a lot of content now.
All right. Let's stretch. Let's come back at 5 minutes past 11.
Okay.
Don't
So,
log
John,
off. Don't
so
leave the
John,
meeting.
this
Bye.
video, I can't have it on my I don't have it on my, because this thing says share screen or tab. So do I have to open the video first, ne?
Yes, you need to open the
yeah.
video first.
Open the video.
Mm-hmm. And then
okay.
when you get to the Teams, if you're gonna share it, you need to include the sound so that it plays the sound directly from the video.
Okay,
Go slow, Mpo.
good morning.
I forget.
But you see, it just runs in our training program. You see, it just runs. Okay, I must stop it. Can you guys see it?
No, we
No, it's
only see
because
the
maybe
I
I'm
haven't
slide.
sharing.
shared
Let me stop
Okay.
sharing and let's see. Then yeah,
Okay.
maybe you should share it.
So I
Because I
must
heard
go
some, I
there.
heard the sound, but it was not showing. The video
Okay,
itself
so
was not showing.
now see if it's gonna go. I have a few questions for you around rental management, just to give the participants a practical view of how rental management is implemented at a social housing institution. Renier, can you start by giving us a very brief introduction to yourself and your SHI?
So we're picking up the sound, and there's a black screen showing on my side.
Okay, just
but the
wait,
characters are not.
wait. Oh, goodness. It's not going to work on my side, John. Can't I
It's
email
fine.
it? Will it email to you, or is it too big?
Let me
I'm
see,
going to
Khafi.
struggle.
Send it
Hi,
to
Khafi.
Umpo. I think yesterday's one, she didn't have any battles with that.
Action.
Is it showing Renier and
Good
Khafi?
morning, Renee. Thank you for agreeing to participate
Khafi?
at this point.
Okay,
You need
so
it
we're
at
gonna
this
start.
point, not before this.
Let me just pause exactly where you're gonna say good morning.
Action. Good morning, Renee. Thank you for agreeing to.
Hi, Khafi.
Hi, Bo.
Hi, I see it's 7 minutes past 11. Should we
Okay.
wait a bit longer?
Let's just check. I'm sure everybody's still, they're putting their hands up, so I think they're all around. I think we can continue. John, are you okay with that?
I'm here. Just give us an indication, guys. Are you back? Can we resume with the program? Great. I see hands are coming up. So yeah, I guess everyone is back. So let's pick up with the next section. Thank you.
Okay. So, guys, we're gonna play you a video. This is Khafi and a CEO of Madula Mo Housing Association. It is on rent collection, the best practices, and other incentives that other CEOs are using in order to make sure that they have the advantage of optimizing the rent collection. I'm just gonna play it now. Thank you.
Good morning, Renee. Thank you for agreeing to participate in our training program. I have a few questions for you around rental management, just to give the participants a practical view of how rental management is implemented at a social housing institution. Renier, can you start by giving us a very brief introduction to yourself and your SHI?
Yeah, thank you, Khafi. Like I say, my name is Renier Erasmus. I'm the CEO of Madula Mo Housing Association. Madula Mo started in 2005. We started the social housing company because we were trying to get people off the streets of Hillbrow. And in 2005, we started our first project with 68 units. Over the last 12 years, 15 years, we've grown to 2,600 units, with 1,500 units in Gauteng and 1,100 units down in Cape Town. So we've got two offices. Our main office with our financial backing in Johannesburg, and then a client services office in the Western Cape.
Thanks, Renier. My first question would be around your rent setting approach. Can you describe how you set rentals and what type of methodology you use in setting rentals?
Khafi, the rent set is fairly easy because it's all determined by the feasibility study that we do when we package the project. So we look at the project, and obviously there is the different income bands, the primary and secondary target market, and there's then different units for those primary and secondary target market. And now, in the last while, the SHRA's introduced 5 income bands which you must satisfy. I think you can deviate from them a little bit, but they've given you a guideline for that. So it's we then go and see what does this project will cost, the total cost, and what is the rentals that we can set in each one of those bands. We try to set the rentals as low as we can, but still to be feasible, still to get your 1.3 debt cover ratio, still to get all the indicators that you need to get to make the project work. And that determines the rent for that project. That's the base rental that we start off. Obviously, those rentals are set in accordance with unit type and unit size. So it's the size of the unit, the type of the unit that determines the difference in the rentals that we set into the bands. So to make it just easy for those who don't know, so in the primary income, we will have people between 1.5 and 3.5, and we've got the 2 types of units. So one type of unit will be a bachelor unit, a very basic bachelor unit, and that will be for the first portion of that target market. And a second a portion of the target market will set up a 1-bedroom unit, maybe with one extra kitchen, something in the kitchen, maybe the granite top will be slightly different. We try not to deviate too much inside in terms of quality, because it will only bite you with maintenance. It doesn't help you've got a 1 unit that's got tiles and other units that's got only cement. You know, it only bites you with, so the basics on all the units are the same. Same taps, same ironmongery, same type of light, same type of electrical switches, same type of sanitary ware, so that your maintenance in the long run is the same. So we basically differentiate our units in terms of size and type, and that is set then into our feasibility to determine what the rentals for those units should be.
Thanks, Renier. Would you ever consider an income-based type of rent setting approach?
No, we've looked at that. Very dangerous. Like they say, run, Forrest, run. No, we won't do that. There's basically two portions why we do 2 considerations. The one is if you do income-based rent setting, when that tenant leaves your project for some reason, say for instance that tenant was earning 5,000 Rand a month, and you set your rent then for, say for instance, 1,500 Rand a month. Now that person leaves, but the other person that you get in only earns 3,000 Rand a month. That means you have to decrease your rent. So your whole feasibility has gone out of the window already. Secondly, you will not believe it, but my tenants will come to me and say, but I am paying the same as that person, but my unit is 2 squares less. I said, how do you know it's 2 squares less? No, I've measured it with a measuring tape. It's 2 squares less.
Yeah.
So people, and I think it's the same for me and you. You go to the shop, you buy a bread. White bread got a cost, brown bread got a cost. So you want to know what you pay for.
Good. When you increase your rentals, how do you do that? What is your policy around rent increases?
So normally we would look at inflation. So we do an inflation-linked increase in our rentals. We try to increase all of the stock the same. Historically, we've got communal housing stock in the inner city of Johannesburg. So sometimes we treat that stock a little bit different with lesser increases. But normally we would do CPI plus 1%. And the reason is because CPI does not, the basket of goods in a CPI measurement is not the same as in rental, in terms of maintenance and stuff like that. But in this year, for instance, we have anticipated a drop in the interest rate. We've also, our rentals was increased in the 1st of March, and we already saw what the economy is doing. We didn't know that COVID is coming, but so this year we've only increased by inflation, which was set this year at 4%. So that is basically, we knew this is going to be a tough economic time, so we didn't put the 1% extra. But in normal years, we will normally do CPI plus 1%.
Thanks. Can you describe your approach when you screen tenants for affordability?
So we've got quite an intensive screening process for tenants, and I think we spend quite a bit of money and time on this. I always tell my staff, if you get the right tenant from day one, your troubles is much less. If you don't get involved in pre-screening and you don't get involved in getting the right tenant, it's very difficult, because sometimes there's a mother with 2 kids sitting in front of you crying their eyes out because they need to leave their shack and better accommodation. And there's another person that is a little bit better off in the same income band, in the same. You have to choose the correct tenant. You have to make a choice to say, who's going to be the person that's going to pay the rent, firstly, and secondly, who's going to behave. Because that's another thing. This is now about affordability, but also just as a precursor, if you choose somebody in day one, they find fault with the tap and the door and everything and too much security, don't approve that application. It's just going to give you troubles down the line. So you have to get the right client from day one. So what obviously we've got the rent quota that we have to adhere to, and that's that 33% of salary. So we use that. But then we also look at the person's credit rating. We use the TPN system for that. So in that credit rating, it's, you know, we don't say if you've got a bad credit ever in your life that we won't approve your application. But we look, do you consistently make bad credit decisions? Do you consistently, are you, you know, are you owing a lot on cell phones or on clothing stores and stuff like that? So we need to determine, can you pay the rent? That's the bottom line. And we use TPN and the credit rating for that. We also do quite a thorough budget process with an applicant. So, you know, because people say, I can afford. They say, okay, so let's look at your budget. What is your income? Then what is your expenses in a month? And you can't believe it. And we verify those expenses against the bank statement. And you can't believe it how many times we have to tell a tenant or an applicant, you can't afford to stay here because your budget shows us that you don't have any money left at the end of the month. So we use that, and we sit with an applicant going through that with him. And obviously we look also at your employment. How permanent are you employment? Are you a seasonal worker? Are you permanent? How long have you been with the company? Have you got in a stable industry? You know, those things also determine when we have to choose between 2 tenants. Those are the things that we then take into consideration. If we know that, you know, at the moment in South Africa, we know the metal work industry is very up and down because of the economy. We would rather not choose somebody in the industry, because at the moment they lose their jobs quite frequently. So yeah, so there's a whole basket. But the question that you have to answer yourself, can this person afford the rent plus the utilities? And what do I need to check to make sure that he can? I mean, we sometimes even phone, you know, the previous landlord where they were and say, was this tenant a good payer? Was he always on time with his payment? Just trying to find out if we've got the right client.
Thanks, Renier. In your experience, what is the most used payment method, and how well does it work for you?
So we've got many rental payment options, but the one that we prefer is the debit order system. There's a cost to the debit order system, and what we've seen in the last 3 years especially is more and more people are paying with a credit card. More and more people are coming off the debit order system, because I think there's so many people hunting for their money at the same time. But at the moment, we still got just about 50% of all of our tenants are on debit order. So that helps, because it means before the 1st of the month, 50% of your money is in. So we encourage people. We even do little competitions. You know, if you're on a debit order system, we do a little competition. You win a little prize or something like that at the end of the year, because we prefer that method. The second method that works very well for us is EasyPay. Where on the tenant statement, there's an EasyPay number. You can go to wherever he does his groceries, whether it's Pick n Pay or Checkers or USave or anything like that. He can take his EasyPay number and make a rental payment. So that's very effective, because it also, you know, we discourage people to pay cash into our bank account. So if you pay cash into our bank account, we even charge you a fee for that. We don't want cash in our bank account because it comes with lots of problems. And also people use it as an excuse. I couldn't get to the bank wasn't open, all of those things. So those are the two. During COVID, what we've introduced as well is paying with a card machine, a little Yoko credit card machine with credit cards and debit cards, and I must say it's working quite good. We even got SnapScan, where we've got a SnapScan code at the office. You just go, you snap it, you make your rental payment. We have seen people don't take that up as much. I'm not sure if our clients are so familiar with SnapScan and paying through the internet. It seems like if they need a choice between paying with the card into the card machine or paying SnapScan, they rather choose the card machine. But that's basically our payment methods, of which debit order we prefer, and we've got like 50% debit order and 50% with EasyPay.
Thanks, Nair. What is the average time you take to collect your rentals over the last few years, perhaps?
So I would say that within the first week of the month, we will have about between 85 and 90% of our rent will be in by the first week of the month. The other 5 or 7% is a constant battle right through the month. So we collect rent every day. But about 90% of it comes in before the 7th of the month. And I must say, interesting enough, over COVID, that didn't change much. We saw people about 80% of the money came in round about in the first week, which is compared to 90% normally. But that followed up, and we were able to, by the 20th of the month, we'll be back to that. So in COVID, it changed a little bit, but under normal circumstances, you can say by the first week of the month, 90% of the money is in.
So even though it's a very small amount that you're chasing during the course of the month, if it's below 10% that you're having to chase, what are the methods and the secrets that you have in your back pocket in chasing that 10%?
Baseball bats. No, I'm just joking. I think one of the things that works for us is to knock on the doors. Our house managers goes and knocks on the doors, and people over a WhatsApp or a phone easily tell you lots of nonsense. But to stand face to face with somebody and says, you know, I'm going to pay my rent tomorrow, and you knock tomorrow night again and say, listen, you said you're going to pay your rent, you didn't pay your rent. Where's the rent? It becomes much more difficult. So our house managers is very, very hands-on. And then also our client services staff, you know, they sit for the rest of the month. They will phone you 100 times until you are so fed up. You just go and pay your rent because you don't want people to phone you. Rental is a consistent a method. It's the biggest portion of our business. So every day there's somebody chasing somebody's rent. And I think communication is our best link. Obviously, you know, if that doesn't work, then we'll have to go to the next step, and that next step will be a legal letter. Which sometimes, if that person gets that legal letter by the 7th, you know, they get a shock, so they go and pay. And that legal letter is basically to say we've got a letter that goes out around about the 3rd, 4th of the month. Then we've got one that goes out on the 7th of the month, and if you get your letter on the 10th of the month, it's actually saying, okay, we're cancelling your lease. So that helps for that other people who we struggle to find payment for. That method works for us.
And do serious defaulters move out voluntarily when they get that cancellation letter, or do you have to, in the main, go to the legal process of eviction?
I think in the main, we have to go the legal route. Some people, even if they get cancellation of lease, they don't think it's so serious. But as soon as they hear that they have to go to court to defend themselves, or that we have served them with court papers, then the process of communication starts, negotiation. Because then we go to the tenant and say, listen, I can either go on with this, then you're going to have all the legal fees and everything, and it's going to be on your credit rating. Or if you leave voluntarily, we won't charge you the legal fees. We'll absorb the legal fees that we have got until now. We won't charge you any legal fees. We'll take what we've got of your deposit to settle from your account, and then we won't blacklist you, or we won't give you a bad credit rating. We try to do a lot to get people to go before physical eviction happens. So sometimes even we've got court papers that gives us the right to evict. We will try and get the tenant to move by themselves before the sheriff comes, because all of those things just got added cost, and it's got added bad publicity and all of what comes with it. So our focus is to try and see if we can get people to move out before full legal actions are taken.
Is there any incentive that you can give people to move out than to rather go with the eviction route, or is there no such thing?
Look, we have in the past, but it's not a good idea. In very serious circumstances, we've given some incentives for people to leave, and even some of that was to the point of giving them some of their deposit back so that they can actually move and get another place. It's not good practice. Because as soon as tenants hear that's the way to go, they won't pay you, and they know that you're going to come with some. It's more when it's a very bad case, like for instance, you've got two pensioners in a unit. The one pensioner dies, the other pensioner can't pay. You 5 months down the road with legal processes, which is already heartbroken to do that, with somebody. And then we would try and get that old lady we'll rather give her something to move than to go a full eviction process. But like I said, it's not good practice. It's against a good business model.
Okay. Renier, thank you for that. Is there any message that you would have for a new SHI starting out, perhaps on anything around rental management that I haven't touched on?
No, I think we've covered all of that. Just to say, the basics is get the right tenant from day one. Make sure that you comply with your side of the bargain. Make sure your maintenance is good, your client service is friendly, and they see your tenants as clients, not as you're doing a tenant a favor because you took him out of a Wendy house or out of a bad situation and put him into social housing. If you get that mindset, then people, if you treat the tenant as clients, that's important for your business, you got a better chance of collecting your rent. If you are fair with them, there's a better chance of them collecting the rent. What we've done in the COVID time to the projects where we gave all of those tenants free Wi-Fi, unlimited data for a full month, because we know, you're sitting in the small unit, you're not allowed to leave, you're not allowed to get visitors. It cost us a bit of money, but just the appreciation we got from our tenants, considering them, makes it easier for them to pay their rent. And I think you want people to want to pay their rent. But as soon as there's animosity and stuff, then you get people that takes chances. So I would say that get the right tenant and do very good client service relationships.
Thanks, Renier.
Thank you, Khafi.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
John, can you put the presentation back up? Guys, can you bank all your questions, Novazi and Mariana? Can you bank questions for another 30 minutes at least until 12 o'clock, and then we'll start a conversation. Is that okay with you guys? Please don't forget them, jot them down. John, are you going to put the presentation back up?
Yeah, I am. Let's see.
what I want to do is I want to move on to the property management and property development. It's not going to take me a long, maybe 15 minutes max.
Is it
And
up?
then we go into a bit of a discussion, because I know there's some burning issues on rental management. And then we will have Zanele that will present the accreditation system to you. And then there's an evaluation that needs to happen. Paul, you ready for that? And
Yes,
then we'll
Rafi.
do another reflection before we close off. So yes, I'm going to move on. We're still busy with the property management policy. Remember, we had completed the first aspect, which was related to your property management performance indicators. We then moved on to rental management, and that was a big one. And again, equivalent to client services management, it's the heartbeat, because if you don't collect rental, you don't have an entity. You're not going to be able to pay your debt and so on. So we're now moving on to maintenance and facilities management. We're going to briefly touch on utilities management and then work on project development. It comes at the end as a KPA, but it's actually your starting KPA, because when you start out and you've set up your governance arrangement and you've set up your organization, the first thing you're going to do is to develop a project. And so after developing that project, does the tenant financial property management stuff kick in? So on property management, from a maintenance management point of view, it's important that your policy talks to the different categories of maintenance. Remember, we have about 4 key categories. The first one is emergency. If you have a burst geyser, you can't take 3 days to go. You have to go immediately, shut that geyser down, get the maintenance done to it, and so on, to avoid damage to the property. You could also have acts of nature that, 18 months into my first project, we had a flood. And because our site was steep, the bottom blocks, all the sandbanks had washed into those units, like quite high within the unit. So you could also have an act of nature that can cause an emergency maintenance. That has to be dealt with like within the next 6 to 8 hours maximum. Your second category is your more responsive, reactive type of maintenance. A tenant complains about something. Try and get in there within 3 to 5 days maximum. Try and fix it up. Fix it up properly the first time, right? You know, we have SHIs that have dampness, and all they do is every time there's a complaint, they just go and paint. That paint only lasts. They don't treat the wall. They just keep on painting over. The problem keeps on coming back, and they're spending money on the same thing over and over and over. So from a reactive maintenance point of view, a responsive maintenance point of view, again, it's about doing it within a certain time period and getting the tenant to sign off to say it was done, and getting it done properly the first time. Then you have a third category, which is called your turnover maintenance. So that is when one tenant moves out and you have to get the unit ready for the next tenant to move in. Again, you have time as a pressure point. You know, in South Africa, we are used to a calendar month's notice. So people generally don't move out any day of the month. They move out on the end of the month. And you don't want to keep your unit vacant for a month before you get the next tenant in. So what SHIs do is they arrange outsource services for the end of every month. And they would get crack teams in that would work overnight to get that unit ready for the first of the next month. But also, if you do a good tenant exit process and you do the maintenance while in the last month of that tenant out, you'll have very little to do when the tenant is actually moved out. A word of caution, though, is you can do an inspection, right, during the course of that person moving out, but you can only see what you can see. You won't be able to see that when the bed is removed on the last day, there's actually a broken tile under it, or the carpet is burnt, or when the stove was moved, you see then there's something else wrong under the stove. So those types of things you potentially only see at the end of the month. And it's those small things that need to be addressed overnight to avoid vacancy issue. And then you get your fourth category of maintenance, which is your long-term cyclical maintenance. It could even be a retooling type of maintenance. So what then happens in that case is you will undertake regular building condition assessments, and that building condition assessment will say every 5 years you need to paint, every 10 years you need to replace the roof, every 15 years you need. It will tell you what intervals you need to do. You know the geysers only last for 5 years. When that warranty period is up, that geyser gives in. So you know there's a wholesale replacement of geysers at a particular point in time. So that cyclical maintenance, you save, you put money away in reservations for it. And when that 5-year cycle comes up, you do have the money to do that job. But sometime, like once the project is like 20 years old, you would have to then look at maybe retooling it. So when someone gives notice, you actually do an overhaul of the whole inside of the unit, and so on. So there's also that falls into the long-term cyclical category of maintenance, and it's closely linked to building condition assessments and long-term maintenance planning. And it's also heavily regulated by the SHRA. So there's a requirement that 1.02% of your total development cost must be spent on maintenance. About 60% of that must be put into a reservation to cover the long-term cyclical maintenance, and about 40% of that must be used for your responsive emergency maintenance and turnover maintenance. So there is also a legislative requirement for cyclical maintenance, and it's more about asset preservation. You don't want your units to age prematurely. If you, just to give you an example, if the project that I started in 1998 is now almost 30 years old. And if you drive past that project today, it looks brand new. It looks like it was built yesterday. So that is what social housing looks like over time. Remember, the private guys, they come in, they buy a property, they do as little maintenance as possible, they milk that building with rentals, and then in 7 years they sell it, because that's when the first big maintenance starts coming in. They sell it, a new owner comes in, does all that refurbishment, milks the building for 7 years, and then move. That's how the private sector operates. In social housing, in the European context, in Holland and Canada and those places, 100 years later, their projects are still standing. It's still being rented out to social housing. There's still a demand for social housing. So that is what we're expecting. We're expecting you to be looking way over 100 years as an horizon for the stock that you're building, because in all likelihood, the demand for social housing will never be met. There will always be growing new households needing to start off somewhere, can't move on into the ownership market immediately, will always want to rent. And so that demand will always remain. And so we expect these buildings that the SHRA is investing, or the government is investing in, to be around 100 years' time, and at least for 10 or 15 or 20 tenants to have had used that unit over that 100 years. From an asset preservation point of view, you have to talk about insuring your buildings. You have to talk about health and safety certification that is required for your fire hose reels and those types of things. Asset preservation it does also include the long-term cyclical maintenance. So doing maintenance on something that is degrading as a result of wear and tear, or something that is broken down, is your reactive and emergency maintenance. Your asset preservation is preserving that asset to look like it looks when it was built 100 years down the line. It's more about ensuring that it's insured, health and safety is in, and long-term maintenance planning is in place. The SHRA requires you to have a long-term maintenance plan, and it requires you to do building condition assessments, and it will monitor that you are making the reservations towards whatever the long-term maintenance plan is saying you should be having. so that you can fund the actual cyclical work that needs to happen. And then there's also the tenant satisfaction survey requirement that you need to, when you do the tenant satisfaction survey, please have a set of questions that asks the tenants how they feel about the way in which you're dealing with maintenance and the state of repair units, their buildings, and even the facilities on site, because that gives you a good sense of what satisfaction levels are. If satisfaction levels are below 50%, you must know that you're going to have a rent boycott coming on soon. So you need to do the tenant satisfaction side of things, do it as part of the tenant management cycle, just include your maintenance and your rental management system as questions in that one questionnaire, and then it will answer all of these things. And then it's also no good just to do the maintenance on the inside of the units. You don't look at the outside of the buildings. You don't look at the playground equipment and all the other facilities on site. They're in a poor state of repair. The grass is not cut. It's, knee high and all of that. All of these things work together, guys. You can't only see that the inside of the unit is clean and maintained to keep the tenant happy. The tenant does not live inside of the unit all the time. They also make use of the facilities and the outside spaces. Those must be clean and those must be in a good working condition. So this is what the property management policy requires you to cover in terms of maintenance and facilities management. Can we move on? From a utilities management point of view, guys, there's a number of views on this. So for me, I would recommend in this day and age, you just go prepaid electricity, prepaid water meters. So tenants will put in their money and pay for what they use, and you don't have anything to worry about. Yes, I understand that putting in a prepaid water meter is a cost upfront that may be prohibitive, but there are SHIs that are doing it. The other way of dealing with it is also to put in smart meters that are not necessarily prepaid, and somewhere along the line, as you manage the stock, you may then convert those smart meters to prepaid meters. I'm talking more on the water side. Look, electricity is not negotiable. Just put in prepaid electricity meters. It's a foregone conclusion that in this day and age, that is how you mitigate your risk. But on the water meters, the experience has been that it's expensive. You sometimes can't afford it upfront. But what SHIs are saying is they put in a smart meter and they make it prepaid along the way when they can afford to do that. There are many companies like Smart Meter and that come in and they literally manage this thing via, they load an app onto the tenant's phone and the tenant then buys their services via that app, and the SHI pays something to the service provider, but then it is a cost that is worthwhile because they are better able to collect the utilities. Because remember, if you put in a bulk meter and you are responsible to the municipality to pay it, and you have to bill tenants for it and tenants don't pay, at the end of the day, the Municipal Property Rates Act says that the owner of the property is responsible for the tenant's bills. So ultimately, whether you collect or not, you're going to have to pay it as an SHI. And we have had an SHI that I know of that had more utility arrears than what they had rental arrears. Can you believe that? It has happened and it can happen. And the Property Rating Act has just placed us as SHIs in a worse position in that it makes us responsible as the owners for that municipal bill. Sometimes you don't hear from the municipality until the tenant moves out and you want to put the next tenant in, and the municipality says, well, we can't open another account because this account is 30 or 40,000 rand. As a SHI, you will have to settle that bill before you can put another tenant in. So please, utilities management, make it easy, make it prepaid. Bite the bullet and try and build it into your cost structure upfront, your capital cost. With regards to vacancy management, we spoke about the two things that are the big pressure points. It is really about reletting the unit, going through the whole pre-tenancy leasing process, in time within the 30 days to get a tenant that has paid their deposit and their first month's rental to move in on the 1st of the month. You got to start that the minute that tenant has given the 30 days notice, so that you do have someone ready within 30 days to move in to avoid a vacant unit. At the same time, do as much maintenance that you can do while that tenant is in their last month of tenancy, and keep it to a minimal to do on that end the last day at 10 o'clock when they give the keys. You literally have a number of hours till the next morning before the next tenant moves in. But also do not move in on a unit that is not fully maintained, because they're just going to start unhappy. You're giving them a unit that you haven't done all the maintenance on. They're going to be happy from day one, and that is going to be the impression about you for the rest of their stay. Unhappy tenant. So those are the two key pressure points on vacancy management. It's not a thing that you can deal with on its own. It either falls part of client services management, which is got to do with your letting process, and it forms part of your maintenance process. What I also want to say about vacancy management is it is the procedure in the SHI that costs you the most amount of money, time, and effort, and needs the most coordination, because just imagine this. You have a tenant moving out. The tenant moving out, you've got to do the client interaction with the tenant. You've got to do the maintenance works in the unit, and you've got to get finance involved to close that account and do the deposit refund. So all the departments in an SHI is working on someone that is moving out. At the same time, someone that is moving into that unit, the next person, all three departments are again involved. There's a new account that must be opened, the deposit must be collected, the unit must be rented, the lease agreement must be signed, the screening must be done, and maintenance must come in and make sure that that unit is in tip-top condition on the first when that tenant moves in. So okay, it is a labor-intensive thing. It is one that needs, if the client services department who receives the notice that the person is vacating doesn't send a letter to maintenance or a memo to maintenance to say you got to go in and do the repairs, doesn't send a memo to the finance department to say start closing the account, getting the deposit ready, you're going to have one of those procedures lapsing or not happening, and then you're going to have a fight, and you're going to have an unhappy tenant, and it just, the stack of cards fall down in this procedure. In my experience, it's the procedure that causes the most fights between departments, between staff, because one blames the other for something that has not happened. And it's also the most expensive thing, and you don't really make money on it because you're not getting any extra fees. We're not in the business of the private sector that will charge you 1,500 to sign a lease agreement and an admin fee to do the pre-inspection and that. We don't have the latitude of that type of income. So it's actually just costing us money until we get the rental in. That is all we can bank on. And so it's an important one. Vacancy management, the reletting and the maintenance and the closing of the account and the billing is the one that we get wrong most, and it creates the most dissatisfaction with tenants moving out and the new tenant moving in. Can we move on, John? I think I'm done with this one. Eh? Yeah, so there was a question in the chat about a caretaker. So yes, we do need a caretaker on site, right? Sometimes we call it a housing manager, like Renier gives it that title. At some SHIs, we call it a housing supervisor. In some SHIs, we call it a caretaker. In some SHIs, we call it a social caretaker. So generally, you would have a maintenance officer that does the small maintenance stuff like changing a washer and those types of things, and outsourcing of the bigger maintenance items with, we hold companies on retainer who come in and then do the bigger, more technical stuff like electrical stuff, plumbing stuff, and so on. You have a housing. There's two ways or two methods that happen. Some SHIs have the housing supervisor live on site. So that person is there 24/7, knows what's going on in the project. And some of them have a housing supervisor that doesn't live on site, but they then also have a call center in place for the emergency stuff that comes up during weekends and overnight and so on. And then you would have cleaners that will clean the outside areas and see that everything works, the playgrounds, the washing lines and that. And if it is a greenfields type of project, not a brownfields in the inner center where there's no gardens, then you would find there's a need for gardeners. So this essentially is what the organogram looks like for property management. In this scenario, you have two outsourced arrangements. One is for security, and the second one would be your maintenance service providers that you hold on retainer and you call in to do the jobs as and when they are reported. Can we move on? So on property development, that is the fourth. Can you skip this one? That's the fourth. Where's property development? What's the slide after this one, John? Gosh.
Yeah, it just comes to this case study one and then it closes. Yeah, this is slide number 107 of 108. There's something that so you're saying just after this one, property development plans, there should be something?
Yeah, there's about 3 slides that are missing, and it's strange if you open the one of this morning.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's fine. I'll just talk to the slides that I have in front of me. So from a property development policy point of view, there's a few requirements that accreditation requires. The policy must talk to, or it must stipulate how planning and the cost of the development is to be established. And that cost and that planning must include working with all spheres of government and other stakeholders. So remember, you can't do a project without the province, without the municipality, without the SHRA, without your debt funder. So they would want to know that you're going to present your project to the PSC, you're going to get endorsement from the province and the municipality, you're going to apply to the SHRA for grant funding. The second element of that stipulation around planning and cost relate to the development of homes that meet the economic and social needs of the communities and which are in sustainable environments where people would want to live. So that then says to you that your project must be informed by a market analysis. So you must then display how you would have undertaken a market analysis before you plan your project. The second big element of your policy is that it must talk to the projects or the units must meet the standards as set out in the social housing guidelines. So there are technical norms and standards that you must meet, and the SHRA will give you that guidelines to follow. So it's very much about the fact that units must be self-contained, the types of finishes that you must use, the types of energy saving mechanisms and urban design and layout, the unit typologies. There's a whole lot of technical norms and standards that the social housing program sets, which you need to comply with. And then obviously they want to see that that long-term maintenance plan is provided for. So generally the way in which you do it in a practical way is we give the architect and the QS an added responsibility, and we say to them, when the project is close to nearing construction completion, you must provide us with a fully costed long-term maintenance plan. Because remember, the architect would have said, I'm putting a Hansgrohe tap in, putting this type of toilet, Cobra toilet, and this and this and that. So on the basis of those things, they'll be able to say, but Hansgrohe 101 tap lasts 5 years. And so it must be replaced every 5 years. And I've put in a quick cord geyser, it must be replaced in 5 years and so on. The QS will come then and project a cost in 5 years' time for replacing the geyser, for replacing the tap, and so on. And so that fully costed long-term maintenance plan should be added to the brief of the architect and the QS. And so they should hand it over when the project is handed over. And the reason why I'm saying don't do the long-term maintenance plan when the architect finishes the designs, because as you go into construction, things change. It may be that that unscrewed tap has been discontinued and it's replaced by a new model, and the contractor puts in the new model. So rather wait until the contractor's installed everything, the architect knows what has been put into the project, and the architect is then better placed to do the long-term maintenance plan for you. And that will ensure that that unit stays the same 50, 100 years down the line. Then the last element of the project development policy is that you must be able to use the housing asset as a financial leverage, either to do long-term maintenance planning or to use it as equity to build your next project. But there must be that element of, so the IRR for a project is prime plus 4.5%. So the prime would cover the expenses that the project faces, but the 4.5% profitability that you would make on the project is meant to be used for a contribution towards your maintenance reservations and a contribution towards building up equity. But in this day and age, and realistically, what has happened is that the equity build-up only happens after you've got about your 4th project under your belt. It is something that Renier always talks about and says it doesn't just happen after 1 or 2 projects, but after about the 4th project, you should be able to be in a position, because then you've serviced maybe your first project's debt of 20 years or 10 years of that debt is serviced, and you may have been able to build up some equity into it. So don't also be unrealistic in thinking that you will build up equity after your first project. I don't think it will happen. And then lastly, the property development policy must talk to your initiation stage, your project validation stage. So you must first identify that there's a need for the project. You must then do a quick feasibility to say, well, it's 1 hectare of land. I'm going to put 110 units over that hectare. This is potentially what the costs are going to be. This is what the rental income is going to be. This is my expenses. So this is going to be a viable project. Once you've done that early feasibility study, you will move to stage 2 of project development, which is your development appraisal stage. Here you're going to have at least your architect and your town planner on board. And at that stage, they're going to do some type of a preliminary designs, SDP and so on, to test the feasibility study that you would have done in phase 1. From that stage, you would move on to a design development stage, which is now to define the scope of the project, do proper designs, building plans, have elemental costing. So your QS then comes into play, your engineers come into play at this stage. What you can do is to try and put your professional team together at risk and say to them, look, you work at risk up to a certain point, at which stage you'll be ready to apply to the SHRA for the grant, and the grant may release a further grant of 750,000 as a feasibility grant to get the project more ready. And so that is the way in which these stages can be funded. And then obviously once your building plans and your costings are in place and your engineering designs, and you've confirmed that bulk is available and rezoning is taking place, you would move into the tendering stage. That is the tendering for your contractor, and then move into your implementation stage, which is really the construction stage and the handover of the project. So those are the types of things that you would have to have included in your project development policy. John, I'm actually done. I am not sure why these slides are excluded. What I think is when I email it to you, there's too much graphics, and so it is cutting out some of the slides. So I think I must get a WeTransfer to you and impose, so that when you do send out the pack, you know, there is a complete presentation, and we have to double check that we have when you do receive it, you've got the right amount of slides on it. So that's just by way of making sure that we send out everything. John, so if Zanele is in the room already, then I would suggest we let Zanele go. But we also want to confine her presentation to about 10, 15 minutes max, because we want to then move over to an evaluation and then a reflection. I've already noted there's about 10 questions that I've noted in the chat already.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Hi, Zanele, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everyone.
Over
can you
to
put
you.
on your camera?
Oh, okay.
And she's got the most beautiful face, so there's no reason.
Let's see if everyone can see
There you
me. Can everyone see me?
Yes, we can.
How do I look? I can't even see how I look because I'm trying to share my screen.
Trust me, you look good.
I trust you, John. Okay. Do I have sharing rights?
You should. You are coming through as a presenter, so definitely.
Am I coming through? Okay.
Yeah. Let me. Yeah, no, I think I've stopped sharing, so you should be able to load yours.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly go through the CAP program overview. Ideally, I will get to the SHI accreditation application process. I believe that most of the things have been covered, so I'm just going to fly quickly on the slides.
Zanele, sorry,
yes,
can you take us back to that first slide? Can you tell us where that project is?
Which one?
The one on the slide here?
Am I sharing a different? Okay, it must say CAP program overview. Can you see that?
Yes. So the picture that you've got on that slide, where is this project?
I believe it's somewhere in Western Cape, but I'll just confirm, Happy, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Okay, so I think this is a Madula Moore project, and they've built this safe place for kids to play. If you can look at that netted program, that netted section, is the playground for the kids. Just by way of giving you a sense of what a project looks like, and the provision that they make for parking and recreational activities for the kids and so on. Sorry, Zanele, thanks.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm just going to go quickly through the CAP program overview. I'm sure, can everyone hear me? Am I audible?
You are, yes.
Okay, thank you. So basically the CAP program overview, we look at accreditation, compliance, and regulations. That is why we are called the CAI unit. And I'm going to go to the accreditation of delivery agents. So when you partner with the SHRI, it's either you partner as an ODA or an SHI. I believe, Hafi, you've already touched on that. Everyone in the room should be aware by now that social housing institutions are non-profit companies. So I'm just going to skip that and go to the SHI accreditation process. So what is it exactly that we are looking at? So we do have a qualifying criteria, which is this one. So where does it come from? So we are guided by our regulations. That is why we ask for quite a lot of documents. I must admit the process, it is cumbersome, but it is possible. So these are all the requirements that we ask for in terms of our SHI accreditation. So what happens probably after receiving the application? So this is the SHI accreditation process. I receive the application and I conduct a pre-screening. The reason I conduct a pre-screening is because we have to make sure that the application is ready for external assessment and it meets all the minimum requirements. So I will send out a verification report to the applicant just to make sure that we have everything that we are asking for. The application will then go out for external assessment. And the reason applications go out for external assessment is because there must be that independent review. Then it will serve internally. We have different committees. Firstly, it will sit in a committee called a CAR MENCO. Then it will go to an EXCO, a CAR committee. Then finally, it will go to the SHRA Council. So we can only communicate your outcome when we receive a resolution from the SHRA Council. The process takes 90 days, but there is a caution there. The 90 days is dependent on the readiness of the submission. And if the application it is ready, then it will fall within the 90 days process. Then I'm also just going to go to the requirements that we are asking for. It's like plus 29 documents, and you'll know what we are asking for because you'll get an application form. Then within the application pack, rather, there is a list. It's called a checklist, a verification report, just for you to ensure that before you can even submit the application, you have everything in order. So the process also, it also has a lot of facilitation. The reason we do that, SHRA doesn't say to the applicant, okay, fine, just send an application to us, then it ends there. So we do sit with the applicants just to make sure that they understand exactly that we are asking for before the application can go out for external assessment. So a lot of facilitation takes place before the application can go out for external assessment. And in terms of the conditional accreditation, after you are successful, you are going to get a certificate which is valid for 3 years. There is a condition there. What the SHRA is saying is that within the 3 years, you must make sure that you have an approved project. And by approved, we are not saying fully tenanted. However, we are referring to a signed CCG agreement. Then we no longer have the cycles, meaning that you can submit your application anytime to the SHRA. And there is a designated email address, if you can just see my screen, which is regulations@shra.org.za. I am not sure if I missed anything, but I'm here for any questions. My presentation will end here. Thank you. Happy, John, and Paul, any questions?
Right.
I can't
Right.
see.
No, thank you very much, Zanele. Perhaps, Hafi?
Yeah, so I think we must take the hands that were up earlier on and now. John, if you want to facilitate that, then we can, between Zanele and I, we can do the responses. And then I also want to go through the questions that I picked up in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. I have enabled everyone's mics. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please do so. Let's start with yourself, Pumzile. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, John. Thank you so much. The question is for you, Zanele. I've got a question for you, Hafi. I'm sure you saw it. I wrote it in the text, but this one is for Zanele. Zanele, the process, all the requirements that you listed earlier for the application, yeah, this one. Is it the same for the SHI as well as the ODA, or are there any additional documents that are required for the ODA?
Okay, if through you, John, if I can just answer Pumzile. So at this point, it's the same because for Quick Scan A, the difference is that the ODA application is linked with the project. Then for SHI accreditation, we are asking for the prospect of land. But in terms of the documents for the Quick Scan A, we are asking similar documents. It's just that for ODA, it's going to be linked with the project, meaning that they are very detailed when they do the land assessment. But everything else stays the same.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. John, can you just help me with the questions?
Okay, we have, sorry, you're saying, Zanele?
No, I was just asking because I can't see. If you can just help me with the questions. I'm still presenting, so I can't see.
So now there is Tebe. Tebe, please unmute yourself and pose your question or comment, please.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for a very credible and comprehensive presentation. The question is to Kafi, of which you presented earlier on. It's a question, it's a matter of clarity. I'm coming from the angle which says that the SHI is an institute which is established, it's got its own board, it's got its own management, it's got its own structures. Part of the presentation, you presented that as part of the tenancy program, you will be spearheading the process whereby electing all the tenants, what's supposed to do, and so on and so on. That kind of poses me a bit of a fear in me as a potential prospective SHI, whereby I see myself whereby an agent or a government entity gets to directly interact with my tenants, which then ultimately the day pose a risk whereby my tenants will disregard the SHI and deal directly with the government entity, which in a way risk would be possible not regarding the SHI and in the long term not adhering to the agreements. Then of course leads to lesser adherence in terms of payment. So am I probably incorrect in that interpretation, whereby, because I see whereby SARS comes in an angle whereby it works closely with the SHI to ensure that you give full support in terms of training and capacitation program, so that we're seen as an intermediary in that process. Because the fear is that, yeah, I don't know whether I've got the question correctly.
Yes, Mabuse, so we are not advocating that your tenants engage any sphere of government at all. That pre-tenancy training that we spoke about is something that you will do as the landlord between you and the tenant. So there's no government involvement, and it's a big risk if you bring in any third party, even if it's a non-governmental agency, to talk to your tenants. It must always be you talking to your tenants. Even when the SHRA comes in to do a tenant audit or a tenant satisfaction survey as part of their regulatory program, there's a big communication that goes out to say they're independent, they're external of your SHI, and that there is no, because tenants will always look for the next person that they can go and knock on the door on to avoid paying rental. And so if you allow any third party to talk to your tenants, they will stop talking to you and they will start talking to that third party, hoping that they're going to get the answer they want. So we're not advocating for any government or any other agency involvement in talking to your tenants. It will always be between you as the lessor and them as the lessee. That communication has got to remain. It's a big risk if you allow any third party to talk to them. So I hope that that clarifies that question.
I'm very happy with that response.
Yeah, and you can ask John to run a training program on pre-tenancy training education to teach you how to do it. I'm sure if he has a big enough uptake on such a request, he could design such a program for you guys, because we're not expecting you to know how to do it up front. Me, myself, I was taught from some, we were put through a pre-tenancy training education course before we actually went and did this training ourselves.
Just one last question. Apologies, John, for just one last question. Part of the pre-qualification, probably is to Zanele as well. Part of the pre-qualification assessment, there's a lot of mentioning of the support for provincial and the municipality in terms of the program. Okay, maybe my question is in two phases. One, what is the minimum requirements in terms of the land for be part and parcel of the program. And then from your experience interacting with, especially the provincial level, do we expect any more or less like barriers in terms of that kind of a support? Because I assume maybe I'm coming from the angle which says that are there any possible barriers from the provincial level to say, look, we don't support this and see what's happening, or from your experience? So in simple terms, what is the minimum requirements to be part and parcel in terms of the land? From your experience, has there been any barriers in terms of, look, we aren't supporting social housing program through STRA, so therefore this is not going to go ahead, and see what's happening, and how can one mitigate and avoid that to happen? Thanks.
Anelia, are you going to take that one?
Okay, so in terms of the minimum requirements, looking at the land for SHI accreditation, we asked for the land prospects. It can be in a form of an OTP, so it will be between the company and the private seller. Then we look at the validation of the OTP, and we do advise the applicants to say at least it must be more than 3 months, if not 6, because of our internal processes. Then you'll find that some applicants will lease the land, so it would be that agreement between the applicant and the municipality, and some will then provide a title deed if they own the land. But what is important is that the land must fall within a restructuring zone, because as the SHRA, we only invest in restructuring zones. So when we look at the application, that is the critical requirement. We've seen that with most applicants, there's a problem with OTPs, because they lapse. You'll find that an OTP is no longer valid and the application is still not ready as well. Then there are those who struggle with lease agreements between them and the municipalities as well. So cases differ, per applicants. I'm not sure if there's something that you want to add.
No, I think you covered things. John, can we move on to the next question?
So yes, I see Mabuse, your hand is up. Please unmute yourself, and Togo, you'll be next.
All right, thanks, John. At least today I can maneuver with my mic. This one is raised, is addressed to Javi. I heard you mention earlier that at some stage when the developer have other plans, the asset get transferred back to SHRA. And my question is, if the developer owns the land, how does this happen? It might perhaps depend on how are we coming in as an ODI, or what type of SHI entity we coming in. But I'm just thinking ahead. Look, you will never know what would happen in 10, 15 years. You might, feel like perhaps you're tired, you want out. But, if in my case, I've got a partnership with, investors that own the land, and that is how I want to come in. Yeah, I'll pause there.
Okay, so Mabuse, there's two answers. The easy one is, if you are a registered SHI, the net asset has got to be transferred to another SHI. So there's no opportunity for this the sale of your project on the open market. That one is easy and clear. In the case of an ODA, The SHRA hasn't formally pronounced on it yet, but the policy, when it was written, it made provision for the exit of an ODA under certain conditions, and those conditions for me are not clear yet from the SHRA. And they haven't reached a stage where they have an ODA that is asked to exit yet. So I think in the next few years, that will become a priority of the SHRA to pronounce on. So I can't talk to what is still going to come, but there is provision for an ODA to exit. The conditionalities under which it will exit is something that has still got to be developed. So remember, when you apply for the grant, remember you would have received 65 to 70% of public funds into your project. So as much as you brought the land, about 70% of the money is coming from government. So what the SHRA would do when they give you the capital grant, they would register a suspensive clause over your deed of sale, right? And so it will be registered at the deeds office that the SHRA would have first rights together with the bank that provides the loan and together with SARS, whom has first rights to any outstanding monies owed to SARS. What happens is you decide you no longer want to be an ODA, you no longer want to manage the project as a social housing project. You want to either sell it or you want to sit in the open market. The SHRA will have the first right to the amount of money that they have put in. What that quantum at that point in time is going to be that they would want to be repaid is something that the SHRA has still got to determine. Does that assist you in any way?
Yes, it does. Thanks, Javi.
Okay.
Yeah, look, it actually addresses. I think the next issue would be to focus on, type of what would be the best type of entity to, to engage in given, whatever circumstances. But I think it can be a topic for another day.
I'm
Thanks.
worried. Why is Mabuse wanting to exit? Enter first. How?
No,
Where are you going?
I'm not entering to exit. I'm just saying, things happen. Things
Okay,
happen.
no.
Yes.
No, just pulling your leg.
Okay.
All right,
No,
Togo, you are the last hand on our screen, and I think there are a few chats that I picked up on the chat line as well. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, okay, thank you. Firstly, just a disclaimer, in case this was covered earlier on, I just joined now. I had a doctor's appointment, so yeah. I just want to get clarity here. I've got a PTY Ltd, a company, and I just want to find out, I'm interested in offering like tenant and property management services, which is training and everything that pertains tenant and property management. So do I come in as an ODI or HSI? That's one. Number two, the PPRA, how does it affect the whole SHRA process? And if it does, in my case, will I need to be accredited as a under property management or have like a FFC for real estate? I hope my questions are clear.
So my understanding is that you don't want to develop social housing, but you want to offer property management services to social housing institutions or other delivery agents. Can I just check that I've got that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So
sorry, not as yet. I don't want to develop as yet. Probably in the near future, yes.
Okay.
I will.
Okay. So SHIs are not allowed to outsource their property and tenant management. That is why they are legislated or mandated via the Act, is to be this special social housing management or delivery vehicle. So they're not allowed to outsource any of their business. So you wouldn't potentially get any clients that are social housing institutions. Where the opportunity exists is for you to, ODAs are allowed to outsource almost the entire business. They can outsource the development, they can outsource the property management, they can outsource the tenant management. So potentially those would be the type of clients that may need your services. But you would also have to show to the SHRA when the ODA applies for accreditation and they say to the SHRA, I'm outsourcing my property management services to whomever, they would have to show that they have an SLA in place with that company, and that company would have to show that they are actually having the skills and the experience and the systems to manage social housing stock on the basis of the entire accreditation criteria that I mentioned earlier today around tenant management, finance management, and property management. So you would have to also pivot your business to include the social housing management model for you to pass this partnership arrangement with an ODA.
Okay, okay. And what programs perhaps would be that? Are they available on the training programs, the SHURA programs?
Yes, so John runs a number of programs. He runs one for client services management. There's a rent management one. I think there's a property management one as well. There's a number of programs. You've just got to watch the SHRA website, and they would then indicate which, you'll be able to see which programs are being run.
All right. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks a
Maybe
lot.
just to also add to that, Togo. So outside you and an ODA X getting into an arrangement of sort, I mean, sometimes we do find that projects that we are regulating fall into distress as the SHRA, where there has just been mismanagement and maladministration. So in a case like that, there is a model that says the SHRA may appoint a service provider, property/tenant management agency that could, work in turning around a distressed project. So that is a completely separate supply chain procurement process that we'll be talking about. And, we could link you up with the colleagues in supply chain in terms of how do you get yourself registered. I know one of the requirements that you've got to be on CSD and. But yeah, that's a whole different stream in terms of what I'm hearing you say your focus in terms of service offering is inclined towards. All right.
Actually, yes, that's what exactly I'll be interested in. If you can link me up, I'll appreciate that.
All right. Just so I don't forget, I think drop me an email. You probably would have my email on the confirmations and communication that I would have sent prior to this, and then I would respond to that, please.
Thank you so much.
Great. That deals then with all the hands that we had on the screen. There were a few questions on the chat line. I'm just trying to go back.
John, so I can assist you with that because I made a note of all the questions I picked up to date.
Great.
And yeah, just perhaps I can go through it. So there was one question around outsourcing tenant and property management. I think we've covered that. We said ODA scanned, SHI scanned. There was a question around net disposable income and what should it be. And there was sort of an example used to say, should there be 40% income left after all expenses are paid? I think it's unrealistic to think you're going to get to that high level. Essentially, we look at a net of about 1,000 Rand, even up to 750 Rand a month income that is left over after all expenses are paid as being a sort of a viable tenant from an affordability point of view. But looking at people having a net income or a net income of 40% is just a step too far on the income groups that we're dealing with. Can you do a mixed project? It's advisable sometimes to do some FLISP. I always use the Port Elizabeth projects as an example. So they built a social housing project, and then they built some FLISP units next to it, because what happens is in 5 years down the line, you find that there's tenants that are now ready to buy. They have money to get a bond and pay the deposit, but they don't want to move out of the area. Their kids go to school there, and they feel that they want to stay in the area. The SHI is then able to offer them ownership unit within the project in the same location, so the children are not uprooted, they stay in the same environment, and so on. So it is advisable, but it's also about whether you can afford to do that upfront, because you're heavily reliant on the grant that the SHRA gives you, and they will not fund the construction of FLISP units. They just fund the units that are social housing units. So you would have to find other capital as a developer to be able to do FLISP and other uses or other typologies, which are not necessarily funded by government upfront. Or you'd have to sell FLISP units off plan to get some capital in, and so on. So it's all about, yes, it's better to do a mixed development with a few other stuff on the side, but it's also about how you're going to raise capital to fund such a thing. We covered the issue of pre-tenancy training. There was a bit of a misunderstanding as to whether it can be outsourced to government or not, and we said no. There was a question around a caretaker and whether caretaker is needed. We discussed that in the slide where we spoke about the organogram for property management. There is a type of a caretaker that we call the housing supervisor, that is generally the person that is on site with the tenants. And then there was a question about why do we need to top up our rent deposits? Because the rent deposits are earning interest in any case. Remember, the interest is minimal. If a person is paying 600 Rand rent and they are earning interest on 600 Rand, I mean, it's minute amount of interest they would earn on that 600 Rand. The rent goes up by the rate of inflation, or we even had the rate of inflation +1. And so if you're only going to use the interest as a top up, at some point you're going to have much less than 1 month's rent as a security deposit. And that is going to be very dangerous for you. So it's important to let that interest earn on the side. It's minimal, it's minute, it's not material. It will never be a material amount. And even over the length of stay of a tenant, which is on average 5 to 6 years. And then it's better to get tenants to top up the deposit every time you increase the rent. They provide the difference between the new rent and the old rent, and the 1 month's rental is then maintained. So that's just from a security point of view, it's a good practice, or it's something that mitigates your risk. Then there was a question about how does an ODA make money from the rental income? So generally you would find ODAs are from the property development world, and they know how to make money in the development, and that's where they make their money. On the management side, there will only be bigger surpluses from the rental income in an ODA scenario where the debt portion is much lower because they've put in 20% equity. And so there would be a surplus or a profit to be made from the rental on the basis that they're getting a return on their 20% equity that they put in. So that, and you know, until the debt is paid up, there'll be very little profits or surpluses to be made. But once the debt is paid up, yes, there'll be profits to be made on for the ODAs. So upfront, there's money to be made. If you're a smart developer, you're going to make money because the model allows for that. But on the rental income side, because you've put in 20% equity, you've reduced your bond repayment, there will be a profit that you will make from day one. And that profit will grow as your debt is paid up. So I think that answers that question. And then there was a question around Mabuse asking about selling, and we did clarify that question. John, I think I have got all the questions. There's just a new one that is coming. Is it possible to consider rental insurance on the side just to help tenants where there's a sudden loss of income? We have extensively looked at this over many, many years, and found that the insurance houses are not offering us an affordable product. And so we can't really afford it on the current rental income that we earn. But we do have a very big SHI, the Johannesburg Housing Company. They've managed to create a self-insurance process, and they offer that for 6 months. In the case of a death or in the case of a job loss, that person at least has 6 months to go and find alternative accommodation and so on. So, and the reason why the insurance houses are so expensive is they see our tenants as being high risk from an income vulnerability point of view. And I suppose that is what makes it expensive. But it's something that we have to continuously still strive towards because it is really needed. And it's something that we should be doing, but we don't have a generic system in place at the moment, merely because the cost is prohibitive. John, I think I'm covered, eh? There was one other question about maintenance. Can you use your own company to render maintenance services? So the question is really twofold, Kenny. One is if you are an SHI and you want to build in a maintenance unit into your business, you can do that. If you're an ODA and you have established a SPV to do the social housing bit, and you have a separate company of which you also were directed to do the management side of things, you would then have an SLA between you and that company to say, I'm outsourcing my maintenance to that company. So yes, you can. In the case of an SHI, it can have a related company that it has an arrangement, a SLA with to do its maintenance. So yes, it can be done. And then Zanele, there was a question for you to say, what support do you provide to accredited SHIs? That was the last question.
Thank you. Is it post or pre-accreditation? Because there is support as well, you know, for SHIs who are trying to enter the social housing space. So a decline is not a no. We do have a pre-accreditation support grant. However, how it works is that applicants must try on their own first for us to further recommend them to SD&T. Probably John can also talk to that. And in terms of further support, there is incubation as well. Maybe John, if you can just talk to the support grants that we have.
Yeah, in fact, that was just going to be
accreditation.
Yeah, that was just going to be the last part I conclude with as part of the closing remarks.
Okay. All right.
But I would think maybe something to highlight in what you delivered earlier on is that, you know, the approach that you take as accreditation team is that you do have those room to engage an applicant. So before a person packages this thing, you know, now just done the last 2 days of training. Now, one is at that point of wanting to submit an application. There is a contact that Zanele can share with any one of you who wants to engage with her on one-on-one and give you those kind of hand-holding and guidance, such that, you know, by the time your application comes, it has little or no queries, you know, and we avoid this back and forth and loss of time in the process. So I would encourage one exploring that, you know, don't hastily package this thing and hope for the best, but do build that relationship with the thing. It's part of the support, essentially, in terms of assisting clients to get to a positive outcome. Was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so I did touch on it earlier in terms of us doing more facilitation, you know, just to ensure that the application is ready. So I'm just going to repeat myself again, just to say that when we receive an application, we don't just process. So we do engagements, you know, the one-on-ones that John mentioned now, just to ensure that everything is in order. So we are not alone in this. We do have that offer that support and further support in terms of the grants. John will talk into that. Thanks, John.
Yeah. Perhaps, Rafi, before I then conclude with the closing remarks before we adjourn the session, is there anything from your side? I know that you had mentioned an evaluation.
Paul will do the evaluation next. Yeah, and then we should be ready to round up and close off.
Paul, over to you.
Yes, John, I'm here. So what we're going to do with the evaluation, we're going to use the same format that we used yesterday with the Google Forms. I've just attached the link in the chat, so everyone can just use the time that they have to fill in the questions that are there. And the evaluation form focuses on the general information, the content evaluation, the virtual platform evaluation, the facilitation evaluation, and then lastly, it focuses on the recommendations or any other more information that they might want to put in. So I think they can just use the link that I just put in the chat now. I'll just keep track of it.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, yeah, so go for it, Rafi.
Sorry, and just to add that it would really be appreciated if you guys can please respond. We had a very low response to the, you know, the case study that we had, but we do need the type of feedback that you would give us just to improve the type of training that we do going forward. So we really, really would appreciate it. We're urging everyone. We have 60 people in the room. Could we have 60 responses is my question to you. Thanks, John.
In fact, that was my point. Yeah, thanks very much. So take a minute to, at most, just to populate. I would assume these are just multi-choice type of questions that you've posed. People can just choose and just give us the feedback in that respect. While you are busy with that, because I just see we are racing towards 1 o'clock, and we wanted to have concluded the session by then. Just then on my part, before we adjourn, three things that I would want to highlight. First and foremost, just to say thank you to Rafi, to Mpho, to Uskhumbuzo, and lastly to Zanele for the background work that you guys have done, but also more importantly for helping us to unpack this somewhat cumbersome process and content. So thank you guys so much, and to all who attended, we don't take lightly your commitment and your time that you've put into this. So thank you for gracing us with your presence in the last 2 days. I hope it has really assisted in, demystifying and at least clarifying somewhat one of the critical processes of the SHRA. So thank you. We have made commitment, and there's a list of handouts that we will be sending to you in a mail shot in a week's time. Do expect in that there will be a guide. There's a whole guide that is written around this topic. In fact, it might also assist as you put together these policies, that you look at different sections in that guide that would then provide the content. There will be PowerPoint slide presentation, which essentially is a summary of what is entailed in the guide itself. There was a lot of talk about the restructuring zones and whether the land that one is looking at are in a restructuring zone or not. So there will be a list as well in that pack of restructuring zones. I think that's a good starting point for those of you who have a project opportunity or a land opportunity that you want to explore and see if this would fit in for a social housing project. There was just a few other things few other things, including the recordings of the last 2 days that we will also include in this in this pack of handouts that we will be sending to you. Now, just outside the CCG, which is that big pot of money for the actual development of the stock, SHRA also administers on an annual basis a pot of money that we call institutional investment grants, IIG in short. They are there. I mean, in fact, this money was created or put in place to take care of the support of the growth and the development of the sector. I sit in the unit that administers those grants. Zanele had started mentioning one of those support grants. Related to this particular process that we've just looked at in the last 2 days is the pre-accreditation grant. And one can apply for up to 200,000 rands worth of support in terms of the pre-accreditation grant. And the real intent and purpose of this grant is really to support those of you who are saying they want to be accredited by the SHRA as a social housing institution, SHI. So if you're an ODA, this would not apply to you. But for those that are wanting or want to be accredited for social housing institutions, there is support that SHRA can provide in form of consultants that would assist you where you are struggling. But as Zanele has indicated, the process for you to be able to access that, so we're not going to open the doors far and wide for everyone, but it's got to be targeted in terms of how we do the support. So the first measure is that we want to see that you have applied for this process. You have applied for the accreditation yourself. In fact, what that process or your application helps us with is that once you have applied, that process spits out an assessor's report, and I think Khafi touched on it and Zanele as well. That assessor's report would then enable us to see where are the gaps. The assessor would have picked up that perhaps your property development policy does not meet the criteria. So we know exactly where to punch in terms of support. So that's quite critical that before you write to John or to Dudu requesting a pre-accreditation grant support, that you have taken in the effort to work with Zanele and get your application in, so that we, as part of the input documents in your application for the pre-accreditation grant, we have that assessor's report. It's, as I said, the grant quantum that you can apply for there, it's about 200,000 rands. And there's more detail that we can share with you outside this meeting on. The second grant that we also administer as a SHRA, it's one called the Project Feasibility Grant. This is just essentially money that was created or set aside to support potential social housing projects. So if you're sitting with a piece of land or a building, you want to repurpose this for social housing, and you need to do some feasibility study, carry out some feasibility studies. This would be that money that would assist you to get to do those studies. Khafi spoke of as an example of the need to do that demand study or market demand analysis. So this project feasibility grant also would come in and assist in that respect. If it's an existing building, sometimes before it comes through for final approval for the CCG, we might need to know that is this thing even developable from structural integrity point of view. We need to acquire a report from professionals that can say, okay, this thing is solid, can be processed further for consideration. So there's about 750,000, just shy of R1 million rents that one can apply for a specific project for the SHRA to consider supporting a potential social housing project. In terms of the process, the project must first be registered into the SHRA's pipeline of projects. And there's that step where we do an internal assessment of that application, and where we see that, you know, the gaps that are there or have been identified, if closed, this project will move to readiness and we're able to deliver it. Then that's a motivation for us to then advise you as a project owner to apply for the so there's a pre-step there, if you are listening to me, that has to first happen before we can approve or encourage you to apply for the project feasibility grant. Is that you've got to have that project registered into a pipeline and that project assessed. And if our sense is that these are short to medium type of gaps to get that project to readiness, then we are able to motivate for that grant support. As I said, it's about 750,000 rands that can be applied for, and it's money that can be used for a multiple of things. So it's not just one feasibility study; it's a multiple of things that this money can pay for. Now, the next and the third and very important type of a grant that we also administer, which is also amongst other support grants that we administer, is the Staff Gear Up Grant. The Staff Gear Up Grant moves from an assumption that, just before I move to the Staff Gear, the Project Feasibility Grant, any SHI, any ODA can apply for that grant type. Now, the Staff Gear Up Grant comes from an assumption that your project has been approved for the CCG, the construction phase has advanced to, you are 80%, 90% to now deliver and complete the units. At that point, we are realizing that in space of 6-7 months, you are going to start tenanting. Now, there's an appreciation from government that at that point, an SHI or ODA does not have the resources in terms of putting in place an operational layer of staff that are required to facilitate that tenanting process of that project. So the money there is to help you put in place or to hire staff, operational staff, your credit control people, your lease administration staff, your facilities management staff, etc., etc. These are the people that are there and are needed or are required for the take on of the unit. So SHRA would then pay or assist you to pay the salary cost, those initial salary cost of those staff members. It's usually projected over 4 months, 6 months, depending on the length of time it takes for you to take on those units. One can apply to up to 500,000, R500,000 in terms of the Staff Gear Up Grant. And again, it's open for ODAs and SHIs alike. Moving away from the Staff Gear Up Grant, we have the General Capacity Building Grant. Now, General Capacity Building Grant was created to fund a whole lot of things, including the training program that we just are part of right now, the research projects that the SHRA and any other interested party in the sector may conduct or need to conduct would be funded from the General Capacity Building Grant. For SHI, sometimes you find that a new SHI entrant, they have just been approved for a project and they've just broken ground, but they need in terms of expertise, development management capacity. So we would consider approving a General Capacity Building Grant and get them a resource in form of a development manager, such that that project development can be facilitated to the successful end. This is just but some of the examples. Social facilitation are some of the work streams that we fund through the General Capacity Building Grant. The last of these support grants that we administer is one called the Remedial Action Grant. So now that the units have been occupied, there are tenants, and the SHRA now knocks on your door every 3 months, and you are reporting to the SHRA in terms of those 5 KPIs that Kgafi spoke about. We realize that as you are reporting, there is a trend, and you do seem to be experiencing difficulty, say, for example, with the revenue collection or vacancy management. This remedial action grant is there created to assist those reporting institutions and reporting projects to remedy around those non-performance on those KPIs. Again, the amount or the grant amount really is determined on case-by-case basis and the severity of, but one can go north of R1 million in terms of the support that one can apply for there. So in terms of the remedial action, one already, as you understand, you already must have been a delivery partner already and having stock and tenants under management and already reporting to the SHRA to be able to apply for that support. I think this brings us nicely to the end of our session. I don't know. I saw just a couple more questions coming in on the chat line, but due to time, I'd rather we not. I think Kgafi has also responded to those questions that have come on the chat line. If there isn't anything of an emergency nature, urgent nature, I would suggest that we adjourn on this point. And lastly, just to again thank you all for joining with us for the last 2 days. And my hope is that our paths will cross again. This is not the end, right? Promise me that some of you will come back and tell us that you have applied for a social housing to be accredited as social. In fact, I'm always held to task by senior management that, John, you are running these trainings, but we never see what the impact is. So I need to write a positive story, guys. Please assist me here. That, after having spent this considerable amount of investment in these trainings, let it not be all lost. We want to hear good stories, I attended training in September in 2024, and 2025 May, I got my accreditation certificate. In fact, we have a few examples of some of the clients that have joined with us in the past in the training, and we've supported them through these grants, and today they have that merit accreditation certificate. So please, let's see your applications come through. We definitely need more partners. In fact, one last thing, just as I speak about need for more partners, there is matching orders that have been issued by our council to say they need to see more development and support going into provinces such as Limpopo. Limpopo is underperforming. Free State, there is definitely room for more social housing institutions there. I think Northwest as well. So don't always, look at the usual suspects, your Gauteng and what have you, where you are easily going to find early saturation in the market. But also look at those far out, flung out provinces as well as you consider setting yourself up as a social housing business. Thank you, everyone. So happy that we are right in a minute just before 1 o'clock, and as per promise, we wanted to deliver and have delivered what we set out to deliver. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. You may log off and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye, all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.